Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into the glittering heart of Versailles. The year is 1789, and your slippers squeak on polished marble as you try not to trip on your borrowed lace cuffs. The air smells of beeswax, rosewater, and about 7 layers of old perfume, just enough to smother the faint scent of sweat underneath all those brocades. Somewhere behind you, the golden doors are closing, and it's suddenly, startlingly clear you are in the belly of the beast, the court of King Louis XVI, and absolutely everyone is watching. Silk whispers, powdered wigs nod, and diamonds wink like tiny judgmental eyes from every wrist and throat. You have never been so surrounded by luxury and so completely exposed. There's tension in the corridors, a barely suppressed panic that tastes like metal at the back of your tongue. You could cut the air with one of the Queen's hairpins. In this place, it isn't just the chandeliers that glitter dangerously, it's the people too. Each smile is sharpened, every word a test, and you can practically feel the rumors sticking to your shoes as you walk. But don't get too comfortable. Remember, in the royal court, if you aren't part of the show, you're probably part of the joke. You probably won't survive this. So if you want more hidden insanity of Europe's royal bloodlines, tap the bell, hit the subscribe, and drop your city and time below, because somewhere there's always a royal scandal happening at 3 a.m. Now, let's find out what actually went on behind these velvet curtains. We'll see just how far royal families would go to keep their secrets safe, sometimes even from themselves. Okay, time to slip out of the shadows and into the thick of things. You step into Versailles at the hour before dawn, when the palace is neither asleep nor fully awake, and the whole place feels like a stage waiting for the play to begin. In the long halls, candle flames shudder against gilded mirrors, doubling and tripling every face into an endless, shimmering army. The world outside is already roiling with the first heat of revolution. But in here, nothing can change. Or at least that's what the royals believe. Because Versailles isn't just a building. It's a machine built to keep reality at bay. And you're about to see how that machine works. Step 1. Observe the court. You shuffle through the hall of mirrors, where marble statues judge your every move and gilded ceilings press down like a migraine. Servants hurry with silver trays, careful to keep their eyes lowered, while 100 aristocrats yawn and stretch and pretend not to be terrified of being ignored. You're witnessing the lever, the king's morning ritual, a carefully staged performance, where being seen is worth more than gold. If you're important, you get to watch the king wake up. If you're really important, you might get to hand him his shirt. Imagine a grown man needing help to put on his socks. Now imagine it's your greatest honor to assist. This is not a place where you want to drop anything. You notice something odd. The ritual isn't really for the king, it's for everyone else. Each gesture is loaded with meaning. Every place in the room a coded message. Stand too close, and you're accused of ambition. Stand too far away, and you're nobody. Even the furniture is ranked. There are official stools of honor, and woe betide the duchess who sits on the wrong one. There's a reason for this madness. By keeping all the great nobles close, smothered in etiquette and endless, pointless ceremony, the king keeps them too busy squabbling over fashion to plot rebellion. In this golden cage, the real world might as well be on the moon. The royal family, for their part, can barely breathe. Every action is a public event. If you're Marie Antoinette, you can't even eat cake without an audience. The very act of getting dressed or undressed becomes theatre, complete with a waiting list. The closer you are to the king or queen, the more you see whether you want to or not. But there's another side to this. For the bloodline itself, the royal children, the palace is a playpen and a prison rolled into one. You peer into a nursery the size of a modern house, where little Louis Charles, the doomed Dauphin, learns his first lessons in paranoia. He's watched every second. Tutors measure his breakfast. Doctors count his hairs. Every cough is cause for alarm. Every frown, a potential scandal. You watch as the children's games are policed by a small army of governesses and priests. There's no real family life. There's only the image of family. Actual affection is suspect. Privacy is non-existent. And discipline is relentless. The royal children learn early that their worth comes not from who they are, but what they represent, a thin, fragile thread connecting the past to the future, all held together by a last name and a few shaky chromosomes. Now sneak off down the marble corridor and peek into the salons, where the real power games are played. Here, language is a weapon, wielded with the flick of a fan. Gossip can end a career, or spark a war. You overhear a heated debate about the Queen's latest dress, and realize it's really a coded argument about taxes, loyalty, and whose cousin might marry whom. In this world, every trifle matters. Even the pattern of your embroidery could signal allegiance or start a feud that lasts generations. But the most disturbing thing isn't what's said, it's what isn't. You sense the collective denial, a willful blindness to the cracks running through the walls, both literally and genetically. Behind the powder and perfume, you see the nerves. The king's hands shake just a little. The queen stifles a yawn that looks a lot like despair. There's a quiet, persistent cough in the air, and not all of it comes from the fireplaces. No one talks about it openly, but you can't help noticing how many royal faces look familiar. Cousins marrying cousins, uncles marrying nieces, family portraits start to look like an endless loop. And that's before you get to the rumors. Whispers of secret lunatics in distant castles, of princes who can't walk straight or count to 10. It's as if everyone is pretending the family tree isn't just a circle. And then there's the etiquette, the secret code that keeps everyone in line. You watch a young lady drop her fan in front of the wrong person, and see her social prospects collapse in real time. It's a reminder, every moment at court is a test, and failure isn't just embarrassing, it's potentially fatal. Food arrives, platters of rare fruit, mountains of sweets, and jugs of spiced wine. You try a candied chestnut and nearly break a tooth. Someone nearby makes a joke about how the king's dentist is the real ruler of France. Everyone laughs a little too loudly. It's easy to forget, in all this splendor, that outside the Golden Gates, real people are starving. But in here, the real famine is for attention. You watch as noble children jostle for a smile from the king. Courtiers memorize the day's gossip, and everyone tries desperately not to be the first to fall asleep at the opera. Still, there's an undercurrent of fear. You catch sight of a boy in a too large wig, staring at the floor, lips moving in silent calculation. He's counting the days until his arranged marriage. A few rooms over, a princess barely 13 receives a letter telling her to prepare for a journey to some distant drafty castle. She's never met her Herbert-to-be, but her blood is just the right shade of blue, and that's all that matters. Everywhere you turn, you find reminders that the royal court is a closed system, recycling not just gossip and gold, but genes, traumas, and secrets. You hear stories of the king's hidden cousin, a girl with a crooked spine, kept out of sight in a country convent. Dinner. An awkward silence falls when someone mentions the late duke's mysterious illness, a silence filled by the clatter of forks and the forced laughter of people who know not to ask questions. As the night deepens, you find yourself lost in a maze of halls and hidden doors. A servant, one of the few who actually seems to know what's going on, gives you a sympathetic look and whispers, "Don't get used to any of this. It can all vanish overnight." And you believe her, because beneath the marble and gold, you sense a kind of collective madness, the conviction that ritual and tradition can hold back the tide of change. The next morning, the sun rises over Versailles and finds you still wandering, trailing a cloud of borrowed perfume. You watch the courtiers wake and resume their endless, exhausting performance. The king stumbles through another lever, the queen accepts another bouquet, and the little dauphin frowns over his lessons. Nothing changes, and yet you know that everything is about to. And you? You've survived your first night in the court, barely. You've seen the surface, tasted the luxury, and glimpsed the cracks underneath. You realize that the true insanity of royal bloodlines isn't just in their genes, it's in the world they've built, a place where reality is whatever the king says it is, and where the greatest danger comes not from the outside, but from within. One final warning before you sneak off for a nap. In the palace, it's not the ghosts that haunt you, it's the living. The morning air in Versailles is crisp and almost shockingly cold, even in summer, when sunlight hits the dew-damp lawns and seeps through the tall windows, glinting off silver and gold. You're already exhausted, but the palace never truly sleeps. It simply shifts gears. Courtiers slip back into new costumes for the day, and breakfast is a parade of pastries, gossip, and sidelong glances. But you aren't here for croissants. You're about to witness one of the most pivotal, peculiar, and frankly awkward rituals in royal history, the marriage market. Here's the first thing nobody tells you about royal weddings. They're less about romance than livestock auctions. You don't get to swipe left or right, and there's definitely no following your heart. Instead, the young princes and princesses of Europe are valuable chess pieces on a game board that spans empires. Their value lies not in personality, but in the blood that runs, sometimes rather slowly, through their veins. Your first stop: the Queen's private chambers, where a small army of advisors, diplomats, and family members debate the future over cups of chocolate and letters from foreign courts. A princess of France is on the market, and every gesture is measured. You feel the tension, the hope that she'll secure an alliance, the fear that she might be defective, too sickly, too odd-looking, or worst of all, not quite royal enough, and the constant negotiation of dowries, treaties, and the unspoken truth. How closely related is too closely related. A courier bursts in with news from Vienna. The Habsburgs are offering a son. Cue the subtle eye rolls. Everyone knows the Habsburgs are in a league of their own when it comes to, let's say, creative genealogy. But power is power, and you can't be too picky when you're building empires out of people. The princess in question, barely a teenager, is summoned. She's been drilled for this moment her whole life. How to walk, how to speak, which fork to use for oysters, and crucially, how to keep her opinions to herself. Her tutors have hammered one lesson home. She is not marrying a person, but a country. Outside, a group of noble boys gather, eyeing each other and comparing family crests as if they were rare Pokemon cards. One makes a joke about marrying his cousin for the 5th time, then immediately hushes. Because it isn't really a joke, is it? In royal circles, nearly everyone is family, and every marriage is a risk. You tag along with the marriage negotiators as they begin their day's work. There's an intricate dance to it, examining potential spouses' ancestry charts, sometimes stretching back 10-12 generations, ranking health and looks, and most importantly, counting how many times the same surname appears in a single family tree. Spoiler: a lot. You peek over a diplomat's shoulder at a scroll with more interlocking lines than a subway map, and wonder if anyone in this room has ever met a stranger at a family reunion. The next step is the presentation, an ordeal in which princesses parade through a series of balls, salons, and breakfasts, displaying their posture, teeth, and ability to laugh at dull jokes. The men aren't much better off. One young duke, pale and sweaty, is subjected to a thorough inspection by 2 dowagers who prod his shoulders and whisper about his weak chin. The only thing more valuable than charm is a strong jawline, unless of course that jaw is a little too familiar, but we'll get there soon enough. Here's where the strategy of breeding for power gets, well, a little too strategic. The aim is to create the perfect royal heir, healthy, attractive, and above all, legitimate. But there's a problem. Europe's blue blood is a closed pool. Over centuries, families have married and remarried within their own circle, convinced that only the purest blood deserves to rule. Unfortunately, genetics has a sense of humor. You overhear a physician mutter about the Spanish disease. Not what you think, it's not syphilis this time, but a hereditary limp that turns up in half the royal portraits. Another courtier brags that his cousin can trace her ancestry directly to Charlemagne, but someone else points out that so can nearly everyone in the room. The resulting debate devolves into who has the bluest blood, as if it's a literal pigment. Meanwhile, you notice that no one ever talks about love. The word is almost embarrassing here, like a rash you don't want to mention in public. The young are taught to suppress desire in favor of duty. Your fate is decided before you're out of diapers, sometimes literally, as midwives inspect royal babies for desirable traits. There's a rumor that a Habsburg grandmother once rejected an infant for having the wrong-shaped earlobes. Nobody's sure if it's true, but nobody laughs either. A few days later, you find yourself at a marriage contract signing. The room is packed, the tension is palpable, and everyone is pretending not to care about the fine print, except the lawyers, who are gleeful. There's a long recitation of dowries, lands and promises. One side promises 3 castles, the other a lifetime supply of Rhine wine, and crucially, an alliance against the Ottomans. It's basically an international business merger, but with more layers. The princess looks serene, but you catch her glancing nervously at her intended. He, for his part, is only 16, but already wears the expression of someone who knows his life will be a series of dinner parties and diplomatic headaches. When they finally exchange rings, the applause is polite, but you notice the older women in the room immediately begin plotting the next set of marriages. This isn't a happy ending, it's just the opening move. Here's where things get darkly comic. Since the pool of acceptable partners is so small, nearly everyone is at least a cousin, first, second, or something in between. The resulting family reunions are less like your awkward Thanksgiving and more like a genetics convention. Over time, patterns emerge, strange ones. Certain facial features repeat, odd illnesses run in the blood, and everyone seems to share an ancestor named Philip or Elizabeth. Even the royal pets start to look a little inbred. Occasionally, a fresh face appears, some minor German prince or distant Italian duchess, and everyone buzzes with excitement. Could this be the infusion of new blood the family desperately needs? But usually, the cycle continues. Alliances forged and reforged, generation after generation, until the tree is more a tangled wreath. Let's not forget the darker undercurrent, the constant, unspoken anxiety about heirs. No matter how many times the ritual is performed, there is always fear. What if the line fails? What if the new couple can't have children? Or worse, what if the children are imperfect? A royal family with no heirs is an extinction event. You watch as young brides are monitored obsessively for signs of pregnancy, as if their bodies are state property. Mid-whisper, doctors hover, and the stakes are impossibly high. And yet, the system persists. Even when everyone knows it's madness, the machinery grinds on, powered by old traditions, fear and the lure of power. You see parents weep as they hand their children off to strangers, knowing they may never see them again, or worse, that they'll see them only in the context of another political negotiation. Not all arranged marriages are miserable, of course. Some royal couples grow to like or even love each other, but this is treated as a pleasant surprise, not an expectation. More often, though, you see resignation, strained politeness, and the occasional quiet rebellion. One night, you catch a princess sneaking a note to her childhood friend. It's quickly intercepted by a vigilant governess, who shakes her head. "Remember your duty," she hisses. "You belong to Europe, not yourself." If you're wondering what happens when someone dares to follow their heart, don't. The consequences are rarely happy. Scandal is a constant threat, and the punishments are inventive. One French princess is banished for secretly marrying a minor noble. Another prince is locked away in a distant castle for refusing to marry the right cousin. The message is clear: family comes first, and your own wishes are last on the list. By now, you've realized that the marriage market is less about love and more about breeding, alliances, and control. The rituals, so colorful, so ornate, are a smokescreen. Beneath the silks and jewels, the reality is cold calculation. You spot the queen herself, once a teenage bride from Austria, now grown weary under the weight of expectation. Her letters home are full of longing, homesickness, and regret. In private, she confides to a trusted maid, "They think me a pawn, but the game will end for all of us one day." Out in the gardens, away from prying eyes, the royal children play, mostly supervised, but sometimes escaping for a few minutes of normalcy. You watch them race, climb trees, and invent stories, all the while shadowed by the knowledge that soon enough they'll be called into the marriage market too. There's a touch of gallows humor among the older courtiers. "At least our family tree is simple," one jokes. "You only need one page." But the laughter is nervous. Everyone knows that in the end, these alliances are a double-edged sword. They bring power, but they also bring instability, heartbreak, and the ever-present risk of genetic disaster. Now, let's talk about the paperwork. Royal marriages require mountains of it. Contracts, waivers, papal dispensations. Because let's face it, marrying your cousin requires some serious church intervention and endless correspondence. You try to keep up, but by the 10th document, your eyes are glazing over. The scribes, on the other hand, are in their element. One whispers, "I wrote the same thing last week, just changed the names." It's a little like writing wedding invitations on autopilot. Except if you get it wrong, nations might go to war. As you slip out of the room, you pass by a window and catch a glimpse of the ordinary townsfolk outside the gates. For them, marriage is about survival, hope, and maybe, just maybe, happiness. For the royals, it's a relentless cycle of compromise, calculation, and sacrifice. You take one last look at the young couple, now bound together, not by affection, but by centuries of strategy. Their smiles are polite, their future is mapped out, and the weight of history sits on their shoulders. You wonder what it's like to grow up knowing your DNA is a matter of national security. As the day ends, you walk through halls hung with portraits. So many faces, all eerily similar, staring down with a mixture of pride, boredom, and faint despair. In a quiet corner, you see a faded painting of a princess who never married, her story quietly erased from the official record. Better forgotten than a scandal, someone mutters. Before you escape for a well-deserved nap, one last observation: the real power in the royal marriage market isn't love or even politics. It's the stubborn, relentless belief that blood, however tangled, trumps everything else, even happiness. So if you ever find yourself at a royal wedding, remember, it's less a fairy tale and more a breeding program, with better jewelry. And if your family tree has fewer than 5 cousins in the same row, you're already ahead of the game. Let's be honest, if you ever sketched a royal family tree, you'd need a second page just to accommodate the loops and crisscrosses. And nowhere is this more apparent or more jaw-droppingly literal than with the Habsburgs. Tonight, you're whisked off to 16th century Spain and Austria, right into the echoing halls where the most powerful dynasty in Europe is, quite literally, gnawing on itself. This is the story of what happens when power gets trapped in a genetic echo chamber, where every marriage is an experiment gone wrong, and the results are written right across royal faces. You start your day in Madrid, in the Alcazar Palace. Greeted not by fanfare, but by whispers, servants hurry past with their eyes down, careful not to stare too long at the portrait of King Charles II, known as El Hechizado, the bewitched. The air is heavy with incense, meant to mask the rank odor of illness and anxiety. Even the light seems cautious, sneaking in around velvet curtains rather than spilling boldly across the marble. You're here to witness the price of centuries of strategic inbreeding, and you don't have to look far. First, you take a stroll through the gallery of ancestors: Philip II, Philip III, Philip III, Philip III. So many Philips, all with the same unsettling features: the famously protruding lower jaw, a wide, drooping lower lip, a nose that can't quite decide if it's proud or pitiful. These aren't just quirks of a painter's imagination, they're evidence of the so-called Habsburg jaw, or mandibular prognathism, a genetic inheritance as potent as any scepter. The same chin shows up in Vienna, in Madrid, and even rumour has it, in some minor dukes, still haunting Central Europe. But the jaw is just the beginning. It's a symptom, not the cause, of a dynasty that turned keeping it in the family into both a slogan and a medical experiment. You leaf through the marriage contracts and find, over and over, the same names repeated: cousins, uncles, nieces. Philip IV, for example, marries his own niece, Mariana of Austria, a union that produces the infamous Charles II, whose life will become a living case study in the dangers of royal matchmaking. Charles II is your host today, and he's both more and less than you expect. The first thing you notice is the silence in his presence. Courtiers are tense, physicians hover, and everyone seems to be waiting for something, anything to happen. Charles, crowned at age 3, is now in his late 20s, but looks older and younger, all at once. His jaw juts alarmingly, his tongue is so large he struggles to speak, and his teeth can barely meet to chew. Eating is a daily ordeal, and he's prone to drooling. His limbs are thin, his body frail, and his eyes dart with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. You're not here to gawk, but it's impossible not to be struck by the living evidence of centuries of inbreeding. Behind the closed doors of the royal apartments, Charles's daily life is an exhausting parade of failed remedies. Court doctors debate whether his problems are the result of witchcraft, bad humours, or simple genetics. Mercury ointments, herbal brews, and the occasional exorcism are all on the menu. None of them work unless you count making things worse as progress. You watch as a royal physician applies a poultice of pigeon dung to the king's jaw, and resist the urge to ask if they've tried a less medieval option like not marrying your niece. It's not just Charles. The Habsburgs' family tree reads like a cautionary tale, and the warning signs are everywhere. By the time Charles is born, the Spanish branch of the family has spent more than 2 centuries whittling down its gene pool. Historians estimate that more than 80% of Charles's ancestry can be traced to just 2 individuals. Imagine a family reunion where most of the guests are, genetically, your siblings, and then imagine being forced to marry one. If you take a quick peek at the genealogical math, it's dizzying. The Habsburgs married within their own ranks so frequently that geneticists later calculated Charles II's inbreeding coefficient as one of the highest ever recorded outside of laboratory mice. He was, in essence, both his own cousin and uncle several times over. No wonder the poor guy never stood a chance. You wander through the royal nursery, where the next generation is being groomed, quite literally, to continue the line. There's a palpable sense of desperation. Every baby is examined for signs of strength or weakness. Nurses whisper about infants who fail to thrive, quietly ushering the less fortunate out of the main record. You watch as tutors attempt to teach a young archduke to read, only to discover he can barely speak, a detail glossed over in official histories as delicate health. But the Habsburgs aren't alone in their genetic gamble. Across Europe, royal families are playing a similar game. In Portugal, in Naples, in the Holy Roman Empire, blue blood is getting bluer and thinner by the year. The reasoning, of course, is pure politics. Keep the power in the family, ensure alliances are watertight, and avoid the chaos of mixing with lesser blood. But the results are, let's just say, less than ideal. In Vienna, you're introduced to the emperor's court, where a fresh crop of Habsburgs parade for the public, their features growing eerily familiar. An elderly archduchess points out portraits of her ancestors with the pride of a collector, but you notice she skips over the odd-looking children, the ones whose names have been quietly erased from the family Bible. You overhear a courtier joke that if you shake a Habsburg, half of Europe falls out of his pockets. The laughter is brittle. Everyone knows the cost of these unions. There's a grim sense of inevitability about it all. The royal obsession with blood purity becomes its own undoing. The same strategy that once built an empire now threatens to destroy it from within. By the end of the 17th century, the Spanish Habsburgs are teetering on the edge of extinction. Charles II, the last of his line, is unable to produce an heir. Unsurprising, given his list of health issues longer than his scepter. His reign is marked by paranoia, intrigue, and a court that operates in a constant state of crisis management. You're there on the day when, after another failed attempt to produce an heir, the king's doctors gather for a hushed conference. Their notes are comically bleak: weakness of the body, melancholy of the spirit, and in a rare moment of honesty, hereditary defect. No one dares say it out loud, but everyone knows the dynasty is finished. When Charles dies in 1700, childless and racked by illness, the Spanish crown passes to the Bourbons, and the Habsburg experiment, at least in Spain, finally collapses. But don't think the lesson is learned. Even as the Habsburg jaw fades into history, other royal houses continue the tradition, convinced they can outwit biology by sheer force of will and a good marriage contract. You're reminded, perhaps a bit too pointedly, of the saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. The royal families of Europe seem determined to test this theory to its limits. Of course, all this comes at a cost, not just to the unfortunate heirs, but to the entire machinery of power. You watch as courtiers scramble to hide the most obvious signs of genetic trouble. Official portraits are retouched, medical records lost, and inconvenient relatives quietly dispatched to country estates or cloisters. The public, for the most part, is kept in the dark. After all, the myth of royal infallibility must be maintained at all costs, even if the reality is falling apart at the seams. You sneak a glance into the kitchens, where the staff whispers about the king's curse. One cook claims she can spot a Habsburg at 20 paces by the way they chew. Another says she once served a pie laced with extra sugar to the king's cousin to keep her sweet and quiet. Even the servants know that something's not right, but what can you do when the entire system is built on denial? It isn't all doom and gloom, though. The royals themselves, for all their flaws, have moments of surprising humour about their situation. You catch a young archduke trying to wiggle his ears, claiming it's a family talent. An empress cracks a joke about the family nose, to polite laughter. Even Charles II, on a rare good day, manages a smile as his dog jumps onto his lap, unconcerned with blue blood or jawlines. For a moment, you almost forget the tragedy at the heart of it all. But reality always returns. The Habsburg experiment in selective breeding leaves a legacy not just of power, but of pain. The physical deformities are well documented, but the mental toll is harder to see. Anxiety, depression, and a kind of existential exhaustion haunt the family. Some withdraw into isolation, others throw themselves into excess. The palace is both a sanctuary and a trap, its gilded walls closing in with each passing generation. One night, you find yourself alone in the portrait gallery, surrounded by the ghosts of the past. You study the faces, some proud, some haunted, all unmistakably related. It's a chilling reminder that, for all the power and privilege, the royals are as vulnerable to fate as anyone, maybe more so. You feel a strange sympathy for these kings and queens, caught in a web of their own making, unable to escape the consequences of their ancestors' choices. Before you slip away, you notice a new portrait being hung. The artist has done his best, but even the thickest paint can't hide the truth. The Habsburg jaw, jutting forward like a family crest, a warning to future generations. You wonder if anyone will listen. And just as you turn to leave, a courtier leans in and whispers, "Remember, in the end, it's not the crown that shapes the head, it's the blood inside." You nod, a little wiser, a little sadder, and ready to move on. After all, there are still plenty of royal secrets left to uncover. A draft rattles the tapestries as you shuffle into another palace, this time in England, where the weather is always dreadful and the moods, at least among the royals, are even gloomier. Welcome to the era of royal madness. A time when the greatest luxury wasn't gold or diamonds, but simply being able to trust your own mind. You're about to encounter the mad monarchs of Europe, those whose bloodlines brought not just crowns and titles, but demons no court physician could exorcise. If you thought the Habsburg jaw was an awkward family heirloom, wait until you see what happens when hereditary insanity slips in through the castle doors. The first person you meet is King George III, but not the George from the money or the history books. This is George in the late 1780s, his wig slightly askew, his hands twitching over a stack of unread letters. On the surface, he's the most powerful man in Britain. In reality, the court has become a fortress of anxieties. Nobody is quite sure what's happening in the king's head, least of all the king himself. You're ushered into a drawing room with heavy velvet curtains, the air thick with lavender oil, and a faint undercurrent of panic. Doctors come and go in a flurry of whispers, trailing medicine bottles and theories. The palace operates in two rhythms, the public facade and the private, fevered effort to keep George's condition secret. You watch as courtiers pretend not to notice when the king talks to invisible companions, or lapses into a torrent of confused speech, jumping from topic to topic, like a frog on hot bricks. One moment he's discussing naval policy, the next he's convinced he's talking to a tree. The diagnosis. At the time, no one really knows. Theories range from melancholy to possession by evil spirits, to a long list of medical guesses. Porphyria, bipolar disorder, lead poisoning from white makeup, too much arsenic in the wig powder. Whatever the cause, the effect is clear. The crown is suddenly a very lonely place. You linger in the king's chamber as a trio of doctors, each with more medals than actual expertise, argue over treatments. Bloodletting, cries one. Leeches, insists another. The third, apparently a pioneer, suggests a newfangled tonic made from ground pearls and brandy. The poor king gets all three, usually in the same afternoon. His suffering is agonizing, and his lucidity comes and goes in waves. Some days he recognizes his wife and daughters. Other days, he accuses them of being impostors. But it isn't just George. As you travel across Europe, palace to palace, the same shadows haunt every dynasty. In Spain, you meet Charles II again, this time not just as a medical mystery, but as the living proof that mental and physical instability are intertwined. Charles is deeply superstitious, easily terrified, and prone to bizarre rages, followed by long stretches of apathy. Priests circle his bed, muttering prayers against evil, while doctors apply pigeon poultices, again herbal brews, and even suggest tying blessed relics to his ankles. If you think this sounds medieval, remember, the Enlightenment has already arrived, but the royal approach to mental health hasn't exactly kept pace. Your next stop is Russia, where the palaces are even colder and the legends even darker. Ivan V, better known as Ivan the Terrible, reigns with a mind as stormy as a Moscow winter. Here, madness is both a private curse and a public weapon. Ivan's temper is legendary, his paranoia sharper than any assassin's blade. You see him pacing the halls at midnight, muttering about plots and conspiracies, convinced his enemies lurk behind every column. On a bad day, the servants vanish before he even enters the room. On a worse day, they don't vanish quickly enough. Ivan's madness is inseparable from his rule. He alternates between extravagant generosity and bone-chilling cruelty. One moment, he's showering gold on his loyal followers. The next, he's orchestrating a massacre in Novgorod. The boyars, the Russian aristocrats, live in a permanent state of terror, never sure if today's order will be a promotion or an execution. Ivan's fits of rage are legendary. He even kills his own heir in a moment of madness, sealing his dynasty's doom with a blow to the skull. You get the sense that, for some royals, madness isn't just an illness, it's a form of power, terrifying and absolute. Back in France, there's another royal who becomes the object of both pity and fear. Charles VI, the Mad King. You find him wandering the corridors of the Hotel Sampo, convinced he's made of glass. Courtiers tiptoe around him, terrified of shattering their monarch, both literally and metaphorically. On his lucid days, Charles is gentle and poetic. On his bad days, he doesn't recognize his own wife and children. The French court becomes a masterclass in polite denial. When the king insists he's a wolf, everyone agrees it's a very noble wolf indeed. The pattern repeats across Europe. Royal families, desperate to keep their bloodlines pure, accidentally concentrate not just crowns but chromosomes, passing down the hidden risks of depression, schizophrenia, epilepsy, and all manner of nervous ailments. In a time before modern psychiatry, these conditions are barely understood, let alone treated. Instead, the suffering is papered over with ceremony, shrouded in superstition, or if things get truly bad, covered up with exile or silent confinement. You begin to notice a rhythm to the madness. It comes in waves, generations of stability, followed by sudden, spectacular breakdowns. Sometimes the pressure of rule brings out hidden weaknesses. Other times, the marriage of two closely related cousins tips the scales. You watch as young royals are observed for signs of melancholy or weak nerves. A prince who is too quiet is labelled thoughtful. If he talks to himself, he's just eccentric. If things go further, he's quietly retired from public life, sent off to a remote castle or a distant monastery. The suffering isn't just personal, it's political. When a king loses his mind, the entire machinery of government begins to stutter and groan. Regents are appointed, ministers jockey for influence, and ambitious relatives circle like sharks. In Britain, Regency crisis of the late 18th century nearly topples the monarchy as George III's mental state worsens. The country holds its breath, waiting to see if the Prince of Wales will seize power or if the king will recover. Even the opposition in Parliament, never ones to waste a crisis, gleefully use the king's illness as a cudgel in the ongoing fight for control. Meanwhile, rumours swirl like autumn leaves. Is the king mad, or merely unwell? Is it a punishment from God, or the result of witchcraft? Satirical pamphlets circulate, making fun of royal doctors and accusing rivals of poisoning the sovereign. One clever cartoon shows a doctor applying a gigantic leech to the king's crown, while another depicts a queen with a giant butterfly net chasing her husband through the palace. If nothing else, you realize royal madness makes for excellent gossip. But beneath the laughter, there's a grim truth. In an era without privacy, the suffering of royals is never just personal. It's public property, dissected by courtiers, politicians, and the occasional would-be usurper. When a commoner breaks down, it's a family affair. When a king does, the fate of nations hangs in the balance. You pause for a moment to consider what it must be like growing up in these palaces. From birth, every gesture is scrutinized. Every mood shift is a possible omen. Is the child's shyness a sign of future wisdom, or the first flicker of madness? Does the princess's nervous laughter hide a deeper instability, or is it simply the result of a lifetime spent in the spotlight? The answers are never clear, and the stakes couldn't be higher. In quieter moments, you see the personal cost. George III, in one of his lucid phases, sits in the garden and talks softly with his daughter, struggling to recall her name. Charles VI stares at a chessboard for hours, lost in thought. Ivan the Terrible, plagued by guilt and fear, confesses his sins to a priest. Then moments later, launches into a tirade against imagined traitors. You realize that for all their power, these monarchs are profoundly, heartbreakingly alone. Not that the rest of the family fares much better. The wives and children of mad monarchs bear the brunt of the chaos. Queens are forced to take charge, running courts while pretending all is well. Children are kept out of sight, for their own safety, or used as pawns in the endless games of succession. You hear stories of royal heirs shipped off to distant relatives, raised in near total isolation to protect them from the bad blood. Some escape, forging their own paths. Others crumble, their lives marked by anxiety, addiction, or quiet despair. There's one more twist in this tale. Occasionally, a royal's madness is mistaken for genius. In a world that values eccentricity, a king who spends his days composing operas or collecting clocks is celebrated, at least until the day he starts talking to his reflection. The line between visionary and lunatic is razor thin. Court poets spin tales of the king's divine inspiration, while doctors scribble in their notebooks trying to figure out which side of the line he's on this week. But more often, madness is a curse, one that can't be hidden forever. You visit a forgotten wing of the palace, where a young prince, rumoured to be touched, spends his days in solitary confinement. The windows are barred, the walls thick, the servants sworn to secrecy. His name will never appear in the official histories. He's a ghost in his own home. As you leave, a courtier shakes his head and mutters, "Too much blue blood, not enough sense." You smile, but there's no comfort in it. You've seen what happens when power, privilege, and pressure combine in the royal brain. Brilliance, madness, and heartbreak, all tangled together like the branches of a very troubled family tree. One last reality check before you go. Next time you hear someone talking about royal blood, as if it's some kind of superpower, remember that behind the crowns and the carriages, there are stories of sleepless nights, whispered fears, and minds that wandered a little too far from home. Dawn breaks over the chill of Windsor Castle, and you're ushered, not to a banquet or a ball, but into the smallest and most anxious room in the entire fortress, Queen Victoria's personal study. Today's not about thuns or treaties, it's about something far more intimate and far more dangerous than a crown. The hidden curse that trickled out from this very room, travelling across Europe, reshaping entire dynasties, and at times dooming innocent children. You're about to trace the strange, tragic journey of hemophilia, the royal disease, from its unremarkable beginnings in one English queen's bloodstream, to the downfall of empires and the heartbreak of families who could never escape their own genetic legacy. You settle onto a faded velvet chair, the upholstery prickling your skin through your nightclothes. The study is cluttered with papers, portraits, and the faint scent of lavender and ink. Victoria herself bustles in, tiny but fierce, her black dress swallowing her almost entirely, her famously piercing eyes softening only when she glances at a miniature portrait of her son, Leopold. If you're expecting a queen drenched in mystery, you'll be disappointed. She's brisk, practical, and like most Victorians, just a little bit obsessed with family, especially her own. But it's her family that hides the most famous genetic time bomb in royal history. You don't know it yet, but hemophilia will soon become the blood curse of Europe, a secret passed hand to hand, throne to throne, with the gentle clink of wedding rings and the soft, unspoken terror that comes when a child so much as scrapes his knee. So, what is hemophilia? In the simplest terms, it's a disorder that stops blood from clotting properly. To the royal families of the 19th and early 20th centuries, it's something worse than a plague, because it strikes silently, usually in the sons and grandsons who are supposed to carry the family name. A single tiny cut, a fall from a pony, even a stray tooth coming in at the wrong angle, any of these could trigger days of agony, internal bleeding, or even death. The family may have castles, crowns, and gold, but the most important inheritance turns out to be a broken gene, lurking unseen until it's much too late. Victoria's own relationship with hemophilia begins quietly, almost invisibly, with the birth of Prince Leopold in 1853. As a baby, he bruises easily. By the time he's a toddler, even the gentlest bumps bring painful swelling and frightening bleeds that leave his nurses frantic. The royal doctors are at a loss at this point. The The science of genetics is still in its infancy, and no one knows what to call it. In polite company, they refer to it as the disease, as if not naming it might lessen its power. But the disease has plans of its own. Victoria, unknowingly a carrier, will pass the gene to several of her daughters. They, in turn, will marry into the ruling houses of Germany, Russia, and Spain, bringing with them the silent, invisible threat that will haunt royal nurseries for generations. You step into one such nursery, a place that should be filled with laughter, toys, and the comforting bustle of nannies. Instead, there's a hush, a tension so thick you could cut it with a silver spoon if you dared. A little boy sits quietly, one leg propped up, his skin blotched with purples and blues beneath the starched white of his clothes. This is the new face of royalty, a child both precious and precarious, his every movement watched for signs of disaster. The royal family scramble for answers, but science lags far behind. Most still blame bad air, or the wrath of God, or the mysterious consequences of royal blood gone thin. Desperate, mothers enforce an endless list of precautions. No running, no jumping, no games with rougher cousins. You see the heartbreak on the faces of these mothers as they stifle their sons' adventures, trading childhood for safety, all while wondering when the next accident will come. As Victoria's children grow up and marry, the disease fans out across the map. You hitch a ride on the royal wedding circuit to Germany, where Princess Alice's son, Friedrich, bleeds to death after a minor fall, to Russia, where Alexandra's son, the Tsarevich Alexei, becomes perhaps the most famous hemophiliac in history, to Spain, where the infant sons of Queen Anna and King Alfonso their Thane die young, their blood simply unable to keep up with the demands of life as a prince. Nowhere is the tragedy more visible or more politically catastrophic than in Russia. You stand in the shadowed halls of the Winter Palace as Empress Alexandra clings to her son, Alexei, who has once again collapsed with a bruised knee. The court is in uproar, the doctors helpless. Alexandra's faith in the mystic Rasputin is born from her desperation. She will believe anyone who claims they can save her boy. And for a while, Rasputin's prayers and mysterious methods do seem to help, at least enough to convince the Empress that the mad monk is a miracle worker. You can see how the fate of an entire empire might hang, absurdly, on the health of one fragile child. Back in England, Prince Leopold grows into a thoughtful, artistic young man, but every day is lived on a knife's edge. He marries, fathers a daughter, and dies at age 30, after a minor fall triggers a fatal hemorrhage. You see the same pattern repeated across Europe. Royal sons, living in a gilded cage, denied the freedom that should be their birthright. And the daughters? Some become carriers, never knowing for sure until the next generation reveals the truth. As the decades tick by, the courts do their best to hide the disease. Medical records are locked away, deaths are explained as fevers or accidents, and rumours swirl. Still, the aristocratic grapevine is alive and well by the early 20th century. Everyone in royal Europe whispers about the curse of Queen Victoria. Some even blame her for the fall of dynasties, claiming that the hemophilia gene, spread through her descendants, undermined the strength and stability of the thrones themselves. Is that fair? Maybe not. But in the brutal game of politics, perception often matters more than reality. You slip behind the scenes as royal doctors struggle to manage what they cannot cure. The treatments are primitive and mostly useless. Ice, rest, and the occasional hope that prayer will do what medicine cannot. In an era before transfusions, factor replacements, or even reliable pain relief, the best anyone can offer is vigilance and a bit of luck. You overhear a court physician muttering, "No running, no laughing, no life at all." The tragedy is palpable. It isn't all gloom, though. Even within this atmosphere of dread, the children themselves sometimes find ways to rebel, quietly at first. You see Alexei Romanov sneaking out to play with the palace guards, his nurses scrambling to pull him back. Prince Leopold insists on horseback riding, much to the horror of his mother. For a few precious hours, these boys taste normalcy, even as their families watch from the sidelines, hearts in their throats. But the disease leaves its mark, not just on bodies, but on history itself. The Russian royal family's obsession with Alexei's health helps fuel the collapse of the Romanovs. Alexandra's reliance on Rasputin, and his resulting influence at court, turns public opinion against the family, feeding the fires of revolution. In Spain, Queen Anne is blamed for her son's deaths, becoming a symbol of foreign taint. In Germany, Princess Alice's heartbreak over her son's fate haunts her surviving daughters, shaping their own choices. Meanwhile, the royal women carry a different burden: guilt. For them, hemophilia is a secret passed on in ignorance, a genetic accident that comes to define entire branches of the family tree. You see the anguish in Victoria's own letters, as she wonders if she is somehow to blame. Her daughters and granddaughters, unable to change the past or the science, find themselves facing impossible choices, whether to risk passing on the gene or to abandon duty for the hope of a healthier lineage. As modern medicine slowly advances, hope flickers on the horizon. Blood transfusions begin to offer some relief, though not without risk. The first hints of genetic understanding creep into royal correspondence. Maybe, one day, we'll find a way to stop it, one princess writes to her sister, but the damage has been done. By the time science catches up, the golden age of royal power is already in decline. Hemophilia becomes less a political crisis and more a sad, personal legacy, a reminder of the real human costs behind every crown and scepter. You return to Victoria's study, the daylight now slanting gold across her cluttered desk. The Queen herself is gone, but her shadow lingers in every portrait, every carefully preserved letter. You realize that the story of hemophilia isn't just a medical drama or a royal scandal, it's a window into the heartbreak that comes with trying to control fate, to bind power and privilege so tightly that even the blood itself becomes a weapon or a curse. As you tiptoe away, you can't help but wonder how many other secrets, invisible and unspoken, lie buried in the bloodlines of the great and powerful. In the end, the royal disease is less about kings and queens, and more about the tragic limits of human ambition. Sometimes, even a queen can't save her children. Sometimes, the thing you build to protect your family is the very thing that destroys it. You step out into the morning, the castle now quiet, the curse of hemophilia hidden once again in the veins of 100 royal heirs, waiting for the next chapter.
Awaiting continue.
The castle gates creak open, and for once you're not tripping over a carpet or ducking under a chandelier. Tonight you're squeezing into a dim, drafty back room stuffed with scrolls, wax seals, and the nervous scratching of court scribes. Because for all the drama and disaster of royal bloodlines, there's another obsession running through every palace, a deep, desperate need to prove that blood. Welcome to the strange and sometimes hilarious world of royal lineage science, a centuries-long circus of invented ancestors, fraudulent genealogies, weird medical experiments, and eventually the cold, unblinking eye of modern DNA. First, you have to understand just how important blood is to these people. For royals, blood isn't just metaphor, it's the foundation of everything. The right blood opens every door, excuses every crime, justifies every extravagance. Without it, you're nobody, no matter how many velvet cloaks or diamond tiaras you own. And so, for centuries, royal courts have twisted themselves into knots to prove, advertise, and sometimes outright invent the purity of their bloodlines. You begin with the most low-tech approach: storytelling. Step into the library of any self-respecting monarch, and you'll find books, thousands of them, meticulously recording who begat whom, stretching back at least on paper to the days when kings wore wolfskins and ate with their hands. Never mind that most of these stories are as true as a drunken fisherman's tale. For every legitimate ancestor there's a mythical one: Troy's Aeneas, King Arthur, or the odd Norse god thrown in for good measure. The more outrageous the claim, the better. You watch a scribe laboriously copy out the royal family tree, slipping in an ancient hero here, a divine miracle there, because what's the point of having royal blood if you can't make it sparkle a little? But soon, myths aren't enough. As rival families challenge each other's legitimacy, the stakes rise, the paperwork multiplies. Scrolls, coats of arms, illuminated Bibles, birth certificates, and for the very unlucky, papal dispensations for those close-kin marriages. Forgive us, Father, for we have again married our cousin. You see entire rooms filled with dusty documents, each one swearing on pain of excommunication that Princess Sophia is, in fact, the legitimate daughter of Duke Wilhelm, and not, heaven forbid, the result of some midnight liaison with a chamberlain. And if you can't prove your ancestry, simple, you make it up. The rise of for-hire genealogists. is a boom industry by the 16th century. If you're a king or queen, it's standard to pay a small fortune to have your family tree enhanced. Sometimes this means erasing the odd peasant grandfather, or more often, inserting a conveniently noble ancestor in just the right spot. You peek over a scribe's shoulder as he forges a dozen ancient documents in one evening, whistling as he goes. One family even manages to discover a lost Roman emperor among their forebears. Awkward, given that the emperor died centuries before their country even existed. No matter if it's written in ink and has a wax seal, it must be true. As the centuries roll on, the obsession with proof only grows. Enter the age of heralds. Those fussy, velvet-clad officials whose entire job is to police the purity of the aristocracy. You join a herald's inspection, and it's not unlike being audited by the IRS, except with more Latin and fancier hats. They quiz nervous noblemen about the exact sequence of their grandparents' marriages, quiz children on the proper lineage of their pet spaniels, and generally terrify anyone who can't recite their ancestry back 6 generations. If you fail the test, kiss your titles and a hefty chunk of your inheritance. Goodbye. Meanwhile, the scientific revolution is heating up, and suddenly, people want physical evidence of noble blood. In France, physicians begin proving royal status, with medical oddities, the shape of a prince's skull, the color of a princess's veins. You're subjected to the delightful spectacle of a court doctor declaring that blue veins are the mark of royal descent, never mind that nearly anyone with pale skin has the same. One Spanish king's nose becomes so famous that noble families start bragging about their own royal profile. You half expect someone to launch the 16th century equivalent of a TikTok challenge, Habsburg George. But perhaps the weirdest phase arrives in the 19th century, when blood purity becomes both a political slogan and a full-blown medical fad. Across Europe, pseudo-scientific tests explode in popularity. Want to know if you're truly royal? Simply let the family doctor inspect your earlobes, measure your skull, or, if you're really feeling brave, draw a drop of blood and mix it with some mysterious powder to see if it clots in the aristocratic fashion. You're pretty sure the results have more to do with the price of the powder than the purity of the blood, but nobody seems to mind. It doesn't stop with humans, either. Royal horses, dogs, even cows are tracked and bred with the same obsessive care as the human heirs. In Russia, the Tsar's hounds are given longer pedigrees than half the courtiers. You watch a German princess coo over her purebred lapdog, who probably has a better claim to the throne than most minor dukes. The whole thing would be hilarious if it weren't so desperately serious. With the dawn of the 20th century, things take a sharp turn from funny to unsettling. Racial science rears its ugly head, and suddenly, the old games of genealogical one-upmanship are hijacked by movements obsessed with eugenics, cleansing the blood, and drawing ever sharper lines between us and them. You see well-meaning, and some not-so-well-meaning royals lining up for serum tests, convinced that the right drop of blood can settle centuries-old debates over legitimacy and fitness to rule. You wander through an Austrian laboratory, where a professor is pricking the fingers of various archdukes and mixing their blood in little glass vials. The archdukes are bored, the professor is excited, and you're just trying not to faint at the sight of all the needles. The results, unsurprisingly, are utterly inconclusive. But no one wants to admit it, so the tests go on. Pageantry in the name of science. By the mid-20th century, the royal families have another problem. Science starts fighting back, with the discovery of blood types, paternity tests, and eventually, DNA profiling. All those carefully manicured genealogies are suddenly up for grabs. One drop of blood can do what an army of scribes never could: confirm or obliterate centuries of family legends in an afternoon. The first tremors arrive with the humble ABO blood group. Imagine the panic when a child is born with a blood type that couldn't possibly come from their supposed father. Whispered rumors become full-blown scandals. Was the king's second son really his, or was he the result of a dalliance with that handsome stable boy? You can almost hear the scribes scrambling to rewrite history on the fly, and the family portrait painters discreetly turning certain noses a little less Roman. Then the real bombshells start dropping. DNA analysis. You slip into a modern laboratory where scientists, pipettes in hand, are carefully extracting genetic material from royal bones, old hairbrushes, even the occasional ancient shirt collar. For the first time in history, the truth is not just knowable, it's unavoidable. One by one, royal myths start to crumble. That lost prince, whose bones are finally tested, turns out to be a total stranger. That ancient lineage proves to be only a couple of centuries deep. In some cases, the skeletons in the closet turn out to be literal bodies hidden in abbeys, labeled as kings or queens, are revealed by DNA to have no royal blood at all. It's a genealogical soap opera, with science as the unblinking judge. You're there when the results arrive for one particularly storied family. The official history claims unbroken descent from Charlemagne, with a splash of Viking on the side. The DNA report, however, says otherwise. Several surprise ancestors, a little Central Asian DNA, and awkwardly, a few markers more commonly found in the local peasantry. The family matriarch sighs, shrugs, and promptly throws a slightly smaller garden party. Of course, some secrets stay secret. There are still disputes, still missing links, still room for legend in the shadowy corners of the family tree. But the age of proof by paper is over. If you want to claim the throne today, you better have the chromosomes to back it up. The last irony. After centuries of obsession, intrigue and fraud, modern science reveals a simple truth: we're all a little bit royal. If you go back far enough, half of Europe is descended from Charlemagne and probably 3/4 from his horse. The difference between noble blood and the rest of us is a lot less than all those heralds, scribes and powdered doctors ever wanted you to believe. So, as you tiptoe out of the archive, your fingers smudged with ink, your head spinning with forgotten names, and your heart a little lighter, take a moment to appreciate the real lesson. For all their posturing, the royal families were just as confused, hopeful, and a little desperate as anyone who's ever squinted at a family tree and wondered where they really come from. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you hear someone brag about their noble lineage, you'll smile and ask if they've had their DNA checked lately. After all, nothing says I'm special quite like a surprise cousin in the mail. Midnight falls in a Parisian palace, and you're standing in the flickering candlelight of a gallery lined with gilded mirrors, each one reflecting not just the pretty faces of courtiers, but also the shadows of secrets they'll never let see the sun. If you thought Europe's royal families had trouble keeping their lineage straight, wait until you see what happens when those carefully constructed facades start to crack. Welcome to the hidden underbelly of the monarchy, the cover-ups, scandals, secret liaisons, and forbidden children that threaten to unravel the entire royal tapestry. If bloodlines are power, then what happens when that bloodline gets a little muddy? First, let's set the scene. Royal courts are like pressure cookers, and nowhere is this more obvious than in their obsession with appearances. From Versailles to Vienna, St. Petersburg to Windsor, every movement, every word, every fleeting glance is monitored by an invisible army of eyes and ears. Servants, advisors, family members, rival nobles, even the palace mice if you're unlucky. And yet, for all their vigilance, scandal always finds a way in. Maybe it's because, deep down, nobody, especially not a bored, beautiful and power-hungry royal, likes being told no. You slip into a salon where the air is thick with perfume, powder, and not-so-innocent whispers. Over there, a duchess flirts a little too boldly with a visiting ambassador. By the window, a prince who should know better disappears behind a velvet curtain with his cousin's lady-in-waiting. The footmen exchange knowing looks. The truth is, behind all those rules and rituals, palaces are perfect breeding grounds for secrets, especially the kind that can upend dynasties.
Let's get specific. The most basic scandal, almost a royal tradition really, is the illegitimate heir. In a world obsessed with blood purity, nothing terrifies a king or queen more than the suggestion that their children might not actually be theirs or, perhaps worse, that they might have a few unacknowledged extras lurking in the countryside. And yet, from the earliest days of monarchy, the reality is unavoidable. Kings, especially, are notorious for dalliances. Henry VIII, Louis XIV and Charles II, the Merry Monarch, all left trails of unofficial offspring in their wake. Some of these natural children are quietly folded into minor nobility, given land and titles, or shuffled off to convents and monasteries. Others are simply paid off discreetly, if possible.
You watch as a nervous chambermaid presents her problem to a royal fixer. The fixer, unflappable as always, writes a sum on a scrap of paper and hands her a one-way ticket to the country. A quiet arrangement is made. The child will be raised elsewhere. The mother will receive a dowry, or at least a bribe, and the official story will be that she fell ill and left the court for her health. Problem solved, at least until the child grows up and starts to ask questions. Rumor has it there are entire villages in France and England peopled by the descendants of kings, each one carrying a bit of the old family nose. But the risk of scandal isn't limited to kings. Queens and princesses, supposed paragons of virtue, are watched with an even keener eye. Any sign of infidelity, real or imagined, is grounds for catastrophe. When whispers begin to circulate that Marie Antoinette has taken a lover, the repercussions ripple across Europe, feeding the fires of revolution. For the record, most historians agree there's no solid evidence for most of these rumors. But in royal courts, evidence is always optional. The lengths to which courts will go to hide these affairs are both comic and chilling. Blackmail is practically a cottage industry. You see courtiers who discover a secret tryst, quietly slipping away with a little more gold than usual, or the palace laundress suddenly buying a new set of silver spoons. If bribery fails, there's always exile, either of the lover, the courtier who talked, or in the darkest cases, the problematic child. Occasionally, scandal erupts into public view. You slip into the crowd outside Buckingham Palace as rumours swirl about Edward VIII and Wallace Simpson. The British establishment panics at the thought of a king abandoning duty for love. Ministers scramble, newspapers print just enough to stoke the fire without burning the palace down, and the royal family holds a united front until, at last, Edward abdicates, sacrificing the crown for the woman he loves. It's a rare moment of public drama, but most scandals never see the light. For every Wallace Simpson, there are dozens of quiet cover-ups. Not all scandals involve affairs. Sometimes the secrets are stranger: mental illness, physical disabilities, addictions, or even religious conversion. You learn of a Spanish princess quietly spirited off to a convent after showing signs of what today would be called schizophrenia. In Russia, a Grand Duke's alcoholism is explained away as delicate nerves, while his family quietly arranges his exile to a remote estate. The official histories are scrubbed, diaries burned, portraits retouched. The aim is always the same: keep the royal image spotless, even if you have to erase half the family to do it. But the cover-ups are not always successful. Sometimes the secret is just too big to stay hidden. You attend a late-night emergency meeting of royal advisors, as word leaks that a would-be blackmailer is threatening to publish letters proving an affair between a princess and a foreign nobleman. Panic ensues. The family has only two options: pay up or fight back. Sometimes, fighting back means discrediting the blackmailer, perhaps by inventing a few scandals of their own, and occasionally it means something darker. One rival simply vanishes from the record, and nobody at court asks too many questions. You discover that palace intrigue can turn deadly. There are cases of courtiers poisoned, rivals imprisoned, and witnesses conveniently losing their memory after generous gifts from the royal purse. One enterprising valet tries to auction off a stack of love letters belonging to the heir apparent. He is found, a week later, having tragically drowned in a decorative fountain. If you thought reality TV invented the art of the cover-up, think again. The stakes here are infinitely higher, and the penalties for failure, well, let's just say you won't be getting an invite to next year's garden party. Of course, the advent of newspapers and later tabloid journalism brings a new challenge. Suddenly, secrets are harder to contain. The public is hungry for royal scandal, and the press is all too eager to provide it. You watch as palace officials develop an entire playbook for damage control. Distraction: announce a new charity. Denial: the princess is simply resting in the countryside, and when all else fails, deploying the royal lawyers. Still, for every rumor successfully squashed, 3 more pop up in its place. You'd think by now the royals would learn, but scandal is an old habit, and ironically, sometimes even a source of power. An infamous reputation can be turned to political advantage. In France, Louis XV's string of mistresses is the stuff of legend, but it also helps him maintain control over competing court factions. In England, the rumor of illegitimate children sometimes works as leverage. Do as I ask, or perhaps I'll introduce you to your half-brother, the new Earl. Still, most families live in constant fear of exposure. You overhear a duchess confess to a priest that she spends more time worrying about her children's indiscretions than her own soul. A nervous footman wonders if he's the only one in the palace who isn't secretly related to the king. Even the family dogs have suspiciously regal features. If you find yourself wondering why so many royal portraits look alike, remember, sometimes it's just good old-fashioned genetics. Other times it's the world's most successful public relations campaign. Yet not all cover-ups are driven by malice. Sometimes they're simply a way for families to protect themselves from a world that would devour them. In a society obsessed with honor, reputation, and the legitimacy of heirs, a single misstep could end not just a career, but a dynasty. You see the pressure in every tense breakfast, every forced smile at a royal wedding. A princess is expected to produce an heir, preferably male, always healthy, avoid scandal, and maintain the illusion of effortless perfection. No wonder so many snap. In rare moments of honesty, the royals themselves admit to feeling trapped. One young prince, after a night of too much champagne, sighs, "I'd give anything to have just one secret that wasn't worth a fortune to someone else." A queen, old and tired, confides to her maid that she sometimes envies the freedom of the villagers beyond the palace gates. They can love whom they wish, and nobody writes about it in the papers. For every scandal that shakes the world, there are 100 quiet tragedies, lost love, stolen childhoods, lives lived half in shadow, all sacrificed on the altar of family image. The greatest cover-up, you realize, isn't the affair or the secret child. It's the endless, grinding denial that anyone behind those palace walls could ever simply be human. As you slip out of the gallery, the mirrors seem to mock you, reflecting back not just the faces of kings and queens, but the endless, exhausting labor of pretending to be something more than flesh and blood. If there's a lesson here, it's that in royal courts, nothing is ever quite as it seems, and no secret, no matter how well hidden, stays buried forever. And if you ever find yourself at a royal party, do yourself a favor, avoid the punch, don't open any suspicious letters, and remember, if the palace cat looks a little too regal, best not to ask about its parentage. You find yourself blinking in the dazzling sunlight outside a Gothic cathedral, a crowd buzzing with anticipation, the heavy air trembling with incense, sweat, and the metallic clang of church bells. It's Coronation Day, a moment not just of ceremony, but of transformation. Today you witness royalty at its most self-deluded and spectacular, the cult of divine right. When monarchs claimed power, not just by blood, but by the explicit blessing of God, or in some cases, by claiming to be gods themselves. Get ready to see how centuries of myth, ritual, and dangerous belief twisted fragile human rulers into living symbols, perched precariously on the edge of insanity. First, you're almost blinded by gold. The church is a riot of shining chalices, embroidered banners, and vestments so heavy with jewels you'd need a chiropractor just to walk home. There's a reason for all this bling. The show is the point. Royalty isn't satisfied with just being in power. They want everyone to believe they're meant to rule, chosen by destiny, cosmic order, or at the very least a benevolent deity with excellent taste in velvet. You're swept up in the crowd, jostled between sweaty merchants, hard-eyed nobles, and bewildered peasants. Today's monarch, let's call him King Louis for the sake of tradition, will soon become God's chosen on earth. You catch the tension on his face, part terror, part pride, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of how long can I keep this up. The priests begin their chant, their voices echoing up into the arches. You notice every gesture, every word, is part of a centuries-old playbook. The king is anointed with oil, allegedly brought from heaven by a flock of doves, but judging by the bottle's dusty label, probably from a monastery cellar, the archbishop presses a crown onto his head, so heavy it nearly tips him over. "Behold the Lord's anointed," the crowd shouts, some in awe, others just glad to get the day off work. You're not the only one who notices the theatricality. Even in the Middle Ages, some onlookers rolled their eyes. But the magic worked. Peasants knelt, nobles schemed, and the king, for a little while, at least, believed his own press. Here's where things start getting weird. Divine right isn't just a catchy slogan. It's a psychological force, one that warps everyone it touches. The king is no longer just a person. He's a walking relic, a living saint, a half-divine creature who supposedly cures disease by touch, mediates between heaven and earth, and awkwardly never needs to apologize for anything ever. You watch a courtier bow so low he nearly topples, terrified to meet the king's eye. "It is like looking at the sun," he whispers, as if expecting to go blind. This cult of royalty isn't limited to France. In England, you see monarchs heal the king's evil, Screpfler, by laying hands on their subjects, distributing little coins called touch pieces like holy relics. You tag along as a shivering line of sick peasants files past the king, each one convinced a single touch will banish their disease. The king, exhausted and a little grossed out, gamely presses his hand to foreheads, muttering blessings, probably wishing for a bottle of gin. In Russia, the Tsars double down, mixing Orthodox faith with ancient pagan magic. You attend the coronation of Ivan the Terrible, already teetering on the edge of paranoia and megalomania, who is anointed with so many relics and icons you half expect him to start glowing. Here the line between ruler and deity blurs dangerously. Ivan doesn't just claim divine right, he acts as judge, priest and executioner, convinced his power comes directly from God, or depending on his mood, from a horde of very angry ancestors. Not to be outdone, the Holy Roman Emperors in Germany insist their right to rule comes straight from the Pope, who in turn claims authority from St. Peter, who supposedly received the keys to heaven from Jesus himself. You try to keep the family tree straight, but all you end up with is a headache and the sneaking suspicion that someone is making this up as they go along. The rituals are endless. You witness oaths, crowns, sacred swords, rings, scepters, and in one especially confusing Spanish ceremony, a loaf of bread said to be baked by angels. You pass on a taste test. Every act, every artifact is a physical argument. The king is not just a man, he's a cosmic necessity, the living axis of the world. But this myth-making is a double-edged sword. For every subject awed into obedience, there's a priest, rival noble, or ambitious courtier looking for loopholes. You watch a bishop quietly remind a young queen that if she strays too far, her divine right can be revoked by a council of cardinals, or a well-placed rumour. The more godlike a monarch claims to be, the greater the pressure to live up to the role, and the more they fail, the harder they fall. And fall they do. When a king dies, the panic is palpable. Who now is God's chosen? You sit through a succession crisis, where 3 cousins, 4 bishops, and at least 1 horse jockey for the throne, each armed with a slightly different miracle, prophecy, or forged genealogy. The court splits into warring factions. One camp claims the king's soul ascended directly to heaven. The other insists he was cursed and must be buried at midnight, under a crossroads. You can't help but notice that the divine always seems suspiciously political. Occasionally, the line between performance and delusion disappears entirely. Some monarchs begin to believe their own hype, slipping into a kind of cultivated madness. You catch Louis XIV, the Sun King, striding through the Hall of Mirrors, insisting he is the living embodiment of the state. L'état, c'est moi. I am the state. His courtiers nod vigorously, secretly rolling their eyes when his back is turned. The rituals pile up. Every meal, every bedtime, every bowel movement is attended by an audience, as if divinity is something you can catch by proximity. There's a toll to all this pageantry. The king's children grow up in a world where the difference between truth and myth is blurred. Princes and princesses learn early to play their parts, to weep on cue, to parade in costume, to repeat the stories of miracles and omens as if reciting the alphabet. If one cracks under the pressure, there's always a convenient prophecy or curse to explain it away. The myth-making doesn't stop at coronation. You see monarchs commission grand paintings of themselves riding into battle, slaying dragons, or being crowned by angels. Never mind that most never saw a dragon, and the only battle they fought was against indigestion. Propaganda becomes a family business. Every dynasty needs a legend. The Tudors trace themselves to Brutus of Troy, the Habsburgs to Julius Caesar. Even the least remarkable prince is given a makeover as the chosen one, even if he can't tie his own shoe. The divine right dogma warps politics as much as it does personal sanity. Kings are surrounded by flatterers, parasites, and holy men eager to interpret every cough as a sign from heaven. You watch a courtier spin a bout of royal stomach trouble into a prophecy of war or peace, depending on who's paying his salary. Meanwhile, anyone who questions the system risks exile, imprisonment, or a mysterious fall from a very tall window. Occasionally, a royal has the temerity to doubt. You listen in as a young queen confides to her confessor that she feels only human, terrified she'll be exposed as a fraud. The confessor counsels more prayer, and perhaps a few more public miracles, just in case. The ultimate irony, of course, is that divine right is never as absolute as it seems. The same crowds who kneel in awe today will jeer and riot tomorrow. The same bishops who bless a king's reign will quietly switch allegiance at the first whiff of scandal or invasion. For every moment of glory, there's a matching humiliation. Kings stripped of their regalia, queens paraded through the streets as proof that God has changed his mind. You leave the cathedral just as the new king processes by, his face frozen in a mask of practiced serenity. Behind him, you spot the real power, the priests, the generals, the clever courtiers who write the speeches and arrange the miracles. As the sun sets and the crowds disperse, you realize the divine right isn't just about belief, it's about performance, illusion, and a kingdom built on faith as fragile as a soap bubble. Before you slip away, you pause at a side chapel where a peasant woman presses a coin into the hand of a wooden saint, praying for her son's health. You realize the true magic isn't in the crown or the oil, or even the king's divinity. It's in the desperate hope that somewhere, someone is in control, even if that someone is just a man in a very shiny hat. And as you wander back into the shadows, you can't help but smile. For all their claims of godhood, the royals are, in the end, just as human, and just as lost as the rest of us. Your steps echo on the cold stone floors as you wind your way through a lesser-known wing of an ancient European palace. The gilded salons and grand ballrooms are far behind you now. Here, the air is still, thick with dust, and the only light comes from high, narrow windows deliberately out of reach. You've entered the domain of the palace's most inconvenient secret, its hidden royals. Because for every king or queen dazzling the crowds, there are those blue-blooded children who simply didn't fit the script, those born wrong, those who suffered from physical or mental disabilities, those who were simply too unpredictable for public life. Welcome to the other royal family, the ones you were never meant to see. The silence back here is heavy, broken only by the distant clatter of servants, who know better than to linger. You pass thick oak doors, some locked, some simply ignored, and catch occasional snatches of whispered conversation. The staff assigned to these corridors, nurses, governesses, the odd doctor, move like ghosts, careful not to draw attention. Even their uniforms are plainer, their manners subdued. It's as if the walls themselves conspire to make you forget that anyone lives here at all. You're led to a sunless room with threadbare curtains, where a princess sits alone at a chessboard. Her name, once sung in royal nurseries, has faded from court conversation. She's gentle, her movements slow and uncertain, her smile uncertain. Outside, the world imagines her living a life of privilege. Inside, she's a secret, her existence discussed only in euphemisms, delicate, fragile, not quite suited to public life. Her days are measured by the routine of care, not the rhythms of power or ceremony. It's a pattern repeated across Europe. If you know where to look behind the thickest tapestries, at the far end of forgotten gardens, you'll find the hidden branch of nearly every major royal house. Sometimes they are children, a boy who never speaks, a girl whose legs never learn to walk, a beloved little brother who is quietly sent away to convalesce. Sometimes they are adults, out of sight but not out of memory, princes who disappeared after a sudden illness, duchesses remembered only in letters as unwell. In an age obsessed with the appearance of perfection, these family members are reminders that royal blood is as vulnerable as any other. You glimpse the mechanics of this concealment. The moment a child is suspected of being different, the court machinery grinds into motion. Special doctors are summoned, not to cure but to advise, discreetly, of course, on whether the child can be improved enough to fulfill a public role. If the answer is no, arrangements are made. A distant estate is suddenly renovated. An old abbey is quietly repurposed as a restful retreat. For boys, there might be a military posting abroad, so far abroad that no one ever hears from them again. For girls, a convent or a remote country house awaits, out of sight, out of mind. Not that the families are always cruel. Sometimes the parents are heartbroken, caught between love and duty. You see the queen lingering at a nursery door, her hand pressed to the wood, listening to her daughter sing to herself. She wants to go in, but her advisors shake their heads. It is better this way, Your Majesty, for the child's sake and for the crown. The king, for his part, insists on regular reports, funding the best doctors, even arranging visits. But visits dwindle. letters go unanswered, and the great events of the world move on without the hidden prince or princess. The reasons for this secrecy are many, and none of them kind. At the core is the terror of bad blood. For families who've spent centuries convincing the world and themselves of their divine right, anything that hints at imperfection is a threat, not just to reputation, but to legitimacy itself. What if the heir is unfit? What if madness or illness is inherited? What if the family's carefully constructed image shatters under the weight of a visible disability? In a world where power is literally inherited, every genetic quirk is a potential scandal. You peer into the journals of royal doctors. Most are heavy on euphemism, light on fact. Her Highness remains delicate. The prince is of a contemplative nature, misses social engagements due to persistent at keys. Between the lines, you read the truth. Epilepsy, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, autism, and mental illness, all swept under the damask rug. In some cases, even the child's existence is erased from official records. Portraits are painted over, names omitted from family trees. When the public asks, the answer is always the same. The prince is away, studying, or the princess has taken holy orders. There are exceptions. Sometimes a royal is simply too famous or too stubborn to hide. You hear stories of princesses who, despite a clubfoot or a crooked spine, appear at court, dazzling in their courage. Their presence is used as evidence of the family's compassion or resilience, though behind closed doors, the family sighs in relief if the public response is sympathetic. But these are rare. For the most part, the strategy is silence, invisibility, and when possible, rewriting history to suit the needs of the dynasty. The cost is immense, mostly to the hidden royals themselves. Life is a lonely cycle of routine, gentle neglect, and longing glances at the world outside. You watch as a young prince, forbidden from public events, sits at his window, listening to distant music from a garden party he'll never attend. The staff are kind, sometimes even affectionate, but always at arm's length. For them, attachment is a risk. What happens if they're dismissed? Or if the royal is suddenly moved, never to be seen again? Sometimes, the hidden royals rebel, quietly, desperately. You find a secret letter, slipped under a door, a plea to a sibling or a childhood friend. Do not forget me. Some run away, or try to, and for a moment, chaos erupts in the palace. But most settle into the rhythms of their quiet exile, gradually fading into rumor and myth. The secrecy isn't just about disability. Sometimes it's about sexuality. A prince too interested in the arts. A princess with no appetite for marriage. A child whose mannerisms spark whispers in the halls. In an age before language or acceptance for such differences, the answer is always the same: silence, removal, denial. The royal family is a brand, and brands do not tolerate surprises. Occasionally, a hidden royal becomes the subject of public fascination. Rumors swirl of the madwoman in the attic at Windsor, or the sleeping prince in Bavaria. Gossip writers speculate wildly. Was he a victim of poison, a secret heir, or just a casualty of too much blue blood? The truth, always more mundane and more tragic, is rarely told. You begin to see the long-term consequences. The policy of hiding imperfect royals doesn't just hurt individuals, it warps entire dynasties. Siblings grow up haunted by guilt and fear. Parents are forced to choose between love and legacy, and future generations inherit not just the family name, but the family's secrets. Sometimes the cover-up becomes the story. Why was that castle wing sealed? Why did the family stop visiting the summer palace? The answers are whispered, never written. Even after death, the silence continues. You tour family mausoleums, where some names are inscribed in gold, others left out entirely. A princess's grave lies unmarked, her story lost to time. In some cases, decades later, her existence is rediscovered by curious historians, piecing together the truth from hidden letters and secret diaries. The official response is always the same: a gentle nod, a carefully worded statement, and then silence. Occasionally, a modern royal attempts to break the cycle, acknowledging a hidden ancestor or visiting a long-closed institution. The response is mixed: admiration from the public, horror from traditionalists, indifference from those who think it better not to stir up old ghosts. But the tide is slowly changing. The world outside the palace is less obsessed with perfection. Advocacy for the disabled, for neurodivergent children, for LGBTQ faux royals is growing. But the shadow of centuries-old shame lingers. Before you leave this wing, you find one last room. A faded nursery with half a dozen small beds, each carefully made, each unoccupied. On a shelf, dusty toys wait for children who never returned. The walls are painted with cheerful animals, but the paint is cracked, peeling away to reveal the stone beneath. It's a haunting reminder that for all the glitter of crowns and jewels, some royal children were simply forgotten. You step back into the main corridors, blinking in the brighter light. The laughter and music of the palace seem louder here, as if making up for the silence in those back rooms. And you realize the royal family's greatest illusion isn't just about power or legitimacy. It's the ability to make whole people disappear, not with malice perhaps, but with the quiet, inexorable logic of survival. Out of sight, out of mind. So next time you see a royal portrait, or watch a grand procession, remember the ones you don't see. The hidden royals. The ones who grew up in silence, whose stories were almost lost, until you found your way down the quietest hall in the palace. As dawn filters through the frosted glass of a German Schloss, you find yourself trailing behind a court physician, one of those unfortunate men whose entire job is to keep the royal bloodline ticking, no matter how many patients they accidentally cure right into the grave. Welcome to the parade of royal medicine, a centuries-long experiment in which Europe's blue-blooded elite are prodded, bled, blistered, and occasionally roasted alive in the name of health. Forget WebMD. This is more like a never-ending episode of medieval hospital nightmares, starring your favorite monarchs and a cast of medical quacks, royal hypochondriacs, and more leeches than you ever want to see. You're ushered into the sick room of a young archduke, where the air smells of camphor, sweat, and a faint undertone of cooked onions. Someone's latest idea for a poultice? Don't ask. The doctor, dressed in somber black, presides over a small army of assistants, each holding an instrument more frightening than the last. The royal patient lies still as the physician studies his pulse, frowns at his tongue, and mutters a prayer to Saint Dymphna, patroness of mental illness, just in case. Today's diagnosis: excessive nervous humours. Treatment: take your pick. You're offered a ringside seat for the most fashionable medical fads of the age. Bleeding is a perennial favourite. Nothing like draining half a pint of blood to cure what ails you, unless of course it's anemia. Leeches slither in a ceramic jar, ready to attach themselves to royal flesh at the drop of a hat. Cupping, blistering, and the infamous Spanish fly, don't Google it, make frequent appearances. At one point, a tray of pigeon carcasses is brought in, to be applied directly to the patient's feet to draw out the evil. If you're wondering if anyone ever got better from these treatments, the answer is maybe, but mostly by accident. No royal illness is too trivial for maximum drama. The Queen's cough, a sign of overzealous melancholia. The Crown Prince's headaches, clearly an imbalance of the biles. Even pimples merit a team of dermatologists armed with rose water, arsenic, and in one memorable case, a paste made from pulverized emeralds. You resist the urge to suggest a nap and a glass of water, lest you be mistaken for a witch. The real tragedy, of course, is that many of these patients are suffering from hereditary conditions: hemophilia, epilepsy, schizophrenia, and all the other gifts of centuries of inbreeding. But in a time before germ theory, genetics, or anesthesia, most court doctors are flying blind. The treatments are at best harmless, at worst lethal. You watch as a nervous king receives repeated mercury injections for his melancholy, only to grow more erratic with each passing week. Mercury poisoning not recommended unless you're keen on hallucinations and early retirement. But let's not forget the fun stuff. You wander into the royal apothecary, where the shelves groan under jars of dried lizards, unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, crocodile dung, excellent for sunburn, supposedly, and powdered mummy, because what's a little ancient Egyptian magic among friends? There's a joke among the staff: the difference between medicine and poison is the price. In France, you peek into the sick room of Louis XIV, whose personal physician Fagon is famous for prescribing regular enemas. No fewer than 2,000 are administered over the king's lifetime, usually in front of a horrified but very polite audience. The logic? Clean bowels, clear mind, long reign. The result? Well, let's just say no throne was ever so well plumbed. At one point, the king is prescribed gold leaf to eat, for strength. It's probably the world's most expensive constipation. Across the Channel, in England, King George III's descent into madness brings forth a parade of cures. There are ice baths, mustard plasters, camphor rubs, and the application of foxglove, a poison in high doses, a heart medication in very low ones. His doctors debate whether the king is possessed, poisoned, or just plagued by vapors. The only thing they agree on is that more treatments are needed, and quickly. One courtier suggests taking the king on a carriage ride to clear his mind. When the king ends up talking to trees, they quietly return to the drawing board. You notice, with mounting horror, that royals often become guinea pigs for every new medical craze. When electricity becomes fashionable in the 18th century, royal doctors rush to stimulate their patients with mild shocks. You witness a princess sitting bolt upright, hair frazzled, as the court physician assures everyone that the spasms mean it's working. It's not. If the treatments don't work, there's always faith, holy relics, prayers, and the odd exorcism are standard fare, especially for those suffering from mental illness or epilepsy. You hear stories of children being made to wear iron rings for strength, or sleep with a blessed candle under their pillow. If a royal heir's fits are especially alarming, the palace chaplain is summoned to cast out the evil spirit. The poor child, exhausted and terrified, gets little relief except perhaps from the knowledge that everyone is at least pretending to help. The worst cases are quietly hidden away. You see the royal infirmary in the far wing of a Prussian palace, where half a dozen noble children are kept out of sight, their days structured around pills, prayers, and walks in walled gardens. The doctors record their progress in careful, coded Latin, status suboptimus. You suspect that means hopeless. Visitors are strictly limited, sometimes even parents aren't allowed for fear the sight will fuel rumours of bad blood. Amid all the quackery, there are glimmers of progress. Occasionally, a truly skilled physician manages to make a difference. A Bavarian princess, with epilepsy, is prescribed rest, a sensible diet, and gentle walks. She improves dramatically. An English prince recovers from a mystery fever with nothing more than bed rest and hot broth, and a little laudanum for the nerves. But these cases are rare, and the real credit usually goes to the family saint or the Queen's prayers, not the common sense doctor. Of course, the royal obsession with health is as much about image as about medicine. Sickness is weakness, and weakness invites rivals. Every headache is a potential crisis. Every recovery, a cause for national celebration. When a young queen survives childbirth, the event is commemorated with medals, prayers, and a new portrait. If she doesn't, her name vanishes from history, replaced by a new angelic bride, and the court moves on. You're invited to observe the morning consultations. Imagine speed dating, but with symptoms. Dozens of royals parade past the doctor, one with gout, another with the vapors, a third with a suspicious rash. The physician takes notes, dispenses powders. If he's clever, makes sure everyone leaves with a slightly different treatment. That way, when someone improves, he can claim credit. When someone dies, he can blame the other doctors. Job security, royal edition. Occasionally, royal patients fight back. You catch a future king tossing his leeches out the window, insisting he feels better already. A bored princess swaps her healing syrup for sugared wine, then declares herself miraculously cured. Sometimes the real miracle is not dying of the cure. The pressure on court doctors is immense. Success means riches, titles, and maybe a statue in the garden. Failure means exile, disgrace, or, if things go really wrong, a suspiciously swift accident involving palace stairs. You hear of a physician who treats a queen for melancholy with daily walks and music. When she dies anyway, he's exiled to a monastery, his books burned for sorcery. The next doctor prescribes toad extract and is hailed as a genius, until the next death at least. Medical secrecy is paramount. You see court physicians smuggling records out of palaces, hiding embarrassing failures, or quietly bribing servants to keep quiet about a royal's embarrassing symptoms. Sometimes, a death is ruled natural causes, even when everyone knows it was the arsenic-laced cough syrup. The royal family's image must be preserved at all costs, even if that means rewriting a little medical history. With the rise of modern medicine, the worst abuses fade, but the anxiety lingers. Even today, royal health crises are shrouded in secrecy, carefully managed by teams of doctors and PR experts. A queen's operation becomes a routine procedure. A prince's breakdown is described as needing rest. The old habits die hard. Before you leave the sick room, the Archduke's doctor offers you a sly wink and a last bit of advice. In royal medicine, the cure is sometimes worse than the disease. But remember, no one ever got a statue for saying "I don't know." You laugh, but it's a nervous laugh. Because you realize the real sickness at court isn't just in the blood, it's in the desperate need to appear perfect, no matter the cost. And as you slip away, the faintest scent of camphor clinging to your clothes, you make a mental note: if anyone ever offers you a royal cure, run. Night falls over Vienna, and in the flickering shadows of the Hofburg Palace, you realize the palace feels more like a fortress than a home. You're drawn toward the one drama that has haunted every royal family for centuries: succession. Forget fairy tales of peaceful handovers and gentle transitions. When it comes to who gets the crown, Europe's royal houses have staged some of the most anxiety-inducing, cutthroat, and flat-out bizarre episodes in history. You're about to eavesdrop on the chaos of succession nightmares, frail heirs, disputed legitimacy, and enough secret plots to keep even the nosiest courtier on their toes. You slip into a dimly lit study, where a group of ministers is poring over a royal family tree, and the scene is almost comic. Grown men in silk coats and powdered wigs are arguing over who's the least sickly grandson of a dead king, while a bishop in the corner threatens excommunication if the wrong cousin gets chosen. On the table are letters from every corner of Europe, some offering alliances, others warning on war, because when a monarch dies, or just falls ill, all of Europe holds its breath, waiting to see if the next chapter will be a peaceful transfer or a dynastic dumpster fire. The first thing you notice is how fragile the whole system is. The entire fate of a nation, sometimes an entire continent, can hinge on the health of one child. You peer into a royal nursery, where the infant heir lies in a golden cradle, surrounded by doctors, priests, and anxious family members. Every sneeze is a crisis. If the child coughs, 3 countries mobilize troops. If he laughs, the stock market jumps. And if he dies, well, that's when things get interesting. In Spain, you witness the fallout when a young heir, barely out of swaddling clothes, suddenly takes ill. Rumors fly. Was it poison? A curse? Just bad blood? You watch as the court splinters into factions overnight. Some rally behind the sick child's mother, others behind a distant cousin who smells opportunity like a bloodhound. The doctors, of course, are useless. Half of them prescribe more leeches, the other half pray for a miracle. Meanwhile, in England, you sit through a council meeting where the legitimacy of the heir is openly questioned. Was the Queen faithful? Did the King's favourite advisor have too much access to her chambers? You'd think royal babies came with DNA tests, but until recently, all they had was gossip, astrology, and the keen eye of a midwife. The ears, my lord, they're a little too Habsburg. Sometimes a royal will demand a public inspection of the baby, counting toes and fingers as if that could dispel rumours. It rarely does. You watch as the court mobilizes a full-scale propaganda machine. Artists rush to paint flattering portraits of the newborn prince. Poets compose odes to his divine innocence, and pamphlets circulate describing the miraculous circumstances of his birth. Meanwhile, the actual child is whisked away by nannies and kept under 24-hour surveillance, just in case anyone gets ideas about swapping him for a more suitable heir. But succession crises aren't just about sick babies or suspicious births. Sometimes the real trouble starts when there are too many claimants. Picture this: a king dies without a clear heir, and suddenly, every distant cousin with a coat of arms shows up to claim a piece of the pie. You listen in as ambassadors from France, Austria, and Prussia argue about ancient rights, sacred bloodlines, and in one memorable case, a family legend about a mummified toe. The result: decades-long wars, shifting alliances, and the occasional midnight assassination. One of the juiciest succession nightmares plays out in Russia. You sneak through the icy corridors of the Winter Palace during the time of troubles, the period when so many pretenders and false Dimitris show up, that nobody's quite sure who the real Tsar is anymore. One day, a new heir rides into Moscow, claiming to be the lost son of Ivan the Terrible. He's welcomed by the crowd, crowned, and promptly poisoned. The next week, a rival claimant appears. Same story, different ending. You realize that in royal courts, identity is sometimes just a matter of having the right backstory and a convincing mole on your left shoulder. It gets even weirder. Sometimes, an heir is declared dead, only to show up years later, muddy but very much alive, claiming they escaped an assassination attempt. Or a royal toddler is spirited away in the night and replaced with a look-alike. The changeling myth wasn't just for peasants. You see ministers sweating as they try to verify birthmarks, moles, and secret family handshakes, all while the real heir might be locked in a monastery 2 countries away. And then there are the bastards. Illegitimate children, born of mistresses, secret marriages, or the occasional scandalous knight haunt every family tree. Sometimes, they're quietly bought off with land and a minor title. Other times, they're used as pawns, paraded out in times of crisis, as true heirs, when the legitimate line looks a little shaky. In France, you see Louis XIV acknowledge several of his illegitimate sons, elevating them to dukes and marrying them off to solidify alliances. Across the channel, you watch as the English court quietly tolerates the presence of natural children, so long as they don't get too ambitious. But woe betide the bastard who claims more than he's given. Those stories usually end in exile, prison, or a sudden mysterious illness. Sometimes, the problem isn't too few heirs, but too many. The infighting can get downright Shakespearean. Picture 3 brothers, all legitimate, all equally ambitious. The eldest is a hypochondriac, convinced he's clueless. The middle is a notorious gambler. The youngest is charming, reckless, and dangerously popular with the guards. The court splits along party lines, and the palace corridors turn into a snake pit of whispered plots, bribes, and outright threats. A misplaced cup of wine, a suspicious staircase, or a hunting accident can decide the fate of the entire country. You notice how even minor ailments are blown out of proportion during a succession crisis. A prince catches a fever, rumors spread that he's dying, or worse, has already died. Courtiers place secret bets on which heir will outlast the other. Kitchens are suddenly full of tasters, and the royal apothecary is kept very, very busy. In the chaos, the real power often shifts to the women behind the scenes. Queens, mothers, and dowager duchesses become the ultimate survivors, plotting alliances, forging secret pacts, even arranging marriages on the fly. You catch one such dowager quietly meeting with a rival ambassador, trading gossip for guarantees of support. When the dust settles, it's often these royal matriarchs who ensure the survival of the family line. But not even the best-laid plans guarantee stability. Sometimes, the most fragile heir is thrust onto the throne, and the entire empire holds its breath. You watch as a sickly boy, barely able to sit a horse, is crowned king, his mother holding him upright for the ceremony. Or a young queen, terrified and alone, is forced to marry a man twice her age to shore up her claim. The public watches, sometimes with sympathy, more often with barely concealed glee, waiting for the next disaster. And through it all, you notice a simple, grim truth. In royal succession, no one is ever safe. Children are pawns, mothers are strategists, and even the most secure throne can turn to quicksand overnight. One bad cough, one scandal, one clever usurper, and centuries of carefully curated bloodlines can collapse in a matter of weeks. Modern times haven't cured the chaos, either. You peer into the press conferences and legal wrangling of the 20th and 21st centuries. DNA tests, paternity suits, and constitutional crises replace poison and backstairs plots. But the stakes are just as high. The world's fascination with royal succession endures, and the rules, written and unwritten, still drive headlines and family drama alike. So next time you watch a coronation, or see a royal baby held up for the cameras, remember the history humming in the background, all the secret plots, the anxious mothers, the midnight dashes through palace corridors. The succession nightmares of Europe's royal bloodlines are the real fairy tales. Except these stories rarely end with happily ever after. And if you ever wake up one day to discover you're 12th in line for a throne, well, good luck sleeping ever again. The bells of a far-off city toll midnight as you slip through a crowd that's no longer bowing, no longer whispering, no longer watching their every word. Tonight you stand not in the hush of a palace, but in the roar of the streets. The air crackles with something electric: anger, hope, fear, and that peculiar European gift for theatrical chaos. Because here at last, you witness what happens when centuries of incest, secrecy, and blue-blooded folly finally boil over. This is the moment when royal bloodlines neckfire spectacularly, when divine right gives way to divine retribution, and whole nations rise to sweep away the mad, the corrupt, and the tragically unlucky. You push forward into the throng, past the market stalls now, transformed into barricades, past the shopkeepers shouting slogans, past the students with their fists in the air. This is Paris, 1789, but it could be Petersburg in 1917, or Vienna in 1848, or Lisbon, Madrid, Berlin, any place where a crown suddenly seems less a symbol of glory and more a target. The old rules are gone. The only rule now is survival. You smell the smoke of torched decrees and hear the thunder of angry feet. Once the royals lived in a gilded world apart, insulated by ceremony, myth, and an army of servants paid to say yes, your majesty. Now the walls of their fortress have become a prison, and the tide of popular rage is rising fast. The gossip that once sustained the court, who slept with whom, who has the real claim, has spilled into the streets and become revolution. Let's not be sentimental. Revolution is rarely tidy, and it's never just about taxes or bread. At its heart, every great uprising is an answer to the madness at the top. The endless cycle of child heirs, the impenetrable web of cousin marriages, the scandals hidden behind silk curtains. The people don't just want food, they want sanity, dignity, a world where rulers are at least as accountable as the village blacksmith. You slip past a group of former courtiers, now disguised as peasants, muttering about the old days. One clutches a faded portrait of a princess, another swears he always hated the king's favourite mistress. Loyalty, you realize, is the first thing to evaporate when the mob arrives. At the heart of the revolution stands the royal family, bewildered, terrified, still clinging to the fantasy that tradition will protect them. You see Marie Antoinette peering from a barred window, hair-shorn, dignity in tatters. You see Nicholas II of Russia, signing away his throne with a trembling hand, his children huddled in a cold room, waiting for a miracle that never comes. The myth of blue blood dissolves in real blood, spilled on palace steps and street corners. Here's the twist. The very traits that once made royal families special now become their undoing. The physical frailty, the mental instability, the inability to adapt. They're all on display. In France, rumours swirl that the young Louis XV, hidden away in prison, has grown feral, more beast than boy. In Russia, the Romanovs' obsession with preserving the Tsarevich Alexei, haunted by hemophilia, shielded from reality, ends with bullets in a cellar. The people who once accepted the royal myth now see only monsters or ghosts. Revolution exposes everything. The hidden children, the mad uncles, the debts, the betrayals. As the palaces fall, desperate officials rush to burn documents, smash family portraits, and in one memorable case, toss a mountain of powdered wigs into the Seine. You see exiled queens scrubbing floors in foreign mansions, or proud dukes peddling their last jewels for train fare. The old families try to rewrite their stories on the run, but the world isn't listening anymore. But don't think the revolutionaries are immune to irony. Half the crowd outside the Tuileries is probably related to the royal family in some distant way. One more result of centuries of over-enthusiastic matchmaking. You overhear a shoemaker boasting, "My grandmother was a Bourbon, and now I make shoes for the people." There's a strange, giddy freedom in tearing down the old order, but also a touch of regret for the lost glamour, the lost certainty, the lost, if deeply dysfunctional family at the centre of it all. The palace looters make short work of royal treasures. You watch as a golden cradle is dragged through the mud, a sceptre snapped for firewood, and a diamond tiara broken up and sold piece by piece. But the greatest prize isn't gold or jewels, it's the royal archives. Suddenly, secrets once guarded for generations are read aloud in the streets. Letters confessing to forbidden love, receipts for hush money, notes in a queen's handwriting, begging her cousin not to reveal a family scandal. The people howl with laughter, then anger, then pity. The violence is real, and not just symbolic. Heads roll, sometimes literally. Monarchs flee or are led to the scaffold. In Vienna, the Habsburgs scramble to marry daughters into the few remaining safe havens. In Spain, a prince vanishes on a ship bound for the Americas. In England, the threat of revolution hangs over every royal baby's cradle, a reminder that divine right is only as strong as the people's willingness to believe it. Yet, amid the chaos, you glimpse something else, a reckoning with the myth itself. The revolutionaries don't just tear down statues, they rewrite the very idea of what it means to rule. They invent constitutions, parliaments, bills of rights. They argue over how much of the old order to keep and how much to discard. The royal family becomes both villain and victim, a cautionary tale etched into every new law. You might think for a moment that the age of royalty is over, but the truth is more complicated. After the bloodshed, after the executions and exiles, there is always a pause, a moment when the world looks around and wonders, what now? Sometimes, the answer is to restore a monarch, albeit a chastened one. Sometimes a new dynasty rises, promising to be more in touch, more modern, more normal. The cycle begins anew, the costumes change, but the old anxieties linger. You wander through the aftermath, ballrooms turned into government offices, thrones sold at auction, former princesses teaching piano lessons to pay the rent. The myth of royal blood is battered, but not quite dead. In a few years the people will sigh, remember the good old days, selectively of course, and some will even lobby for the return of the crown, minus the madness, the inbreeding, and if possible, the taxes. But something fundamental has shifted. No longer can kings claim to be gods, or queens to be saints. The people have seen too much. The blue blood, once so precious, is revealed as just blood, after all. Red, vulnerable, and easily spilled. The real lesson isn't about the downfall of a family, but about the limits of power, the dangers of believing your own legend, and the price of isolation at the top. You catch the eye of a weary former chamberlain, who shrugs and says, "In the end they were just people, flawed, frightened, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel. We made them gods, and then we tore them down." The revolution, for all its fury, is just the latest turn in the long story of Europe's royal insanity, a reminder that no amount of gold, no length of pedigree, can shield you forever from the world outside your gates. So if you ever find yourself at a rally, a parade, or even a street protest, remember the lesson of the toppled thrones. When bloodlines backfire, it isn't just a family that falls, it's the whole scaffolding of myth, secrecy, and denial that comes tumbling down. And in the silence that follows, the world gets a little stranger, and maybe, just maybe, a little more honest. Dawn breaks over a rain-soaked courtyard in Vienna. You're following the sound of hurried quills and hushed voices, not into a throne room this time, but into the back offices and dusty archives that keep the myth of royalty alive. The palace may seem silent after a revolution, but within its shadowy corners the real cleanup begins. Now you step into the world of royal propaganda, the meticulous rewriting, painting and erasing of history by those with everything to lose. This is where blue blood is filtered, legends are manufactured, scandals are rebranded, and the official story of a family is curated as obsessively as the crown jewels. You slip into a chamber thick with the smell of parchment and candle smoke. A team of royal chroniclers sits at long wooden tables, their ink-stained fingers darting nervously across the page. It's their job to record every triumph, every marriage, every miraculous recovery, but also to quietly forget the mad, the illegitimate, the inconveniently dead. You watch as a scribe pauses over a birth date, scratching out a year, replacing it with a more suitable one. Across the room, a court painter is dabbing extra pink onto the cheeks of a young princess, making her look a little less sickly than she did in real life. Here's the secret. Royal history is not just written, it's edited. The family tree you see in gilded frames at the palace is not the same tree that grows wild in the old letters and secret diaries locked away in the archives. The version shared with the world is tidied up, sanded smooth, and strategically branched. That missing uncle, he died young. The scandalous aunt who ran away with a poet, she's now in perpetual retreat for her health. The king's second wife, the one who was quietly exiled after a nervous collapse, she's erased with a stroke of the pen, her portraits quietly moved to the attic. You sit in on a lesson with a royal tutor, teaching the next generation how to recite the official family saga. It's a masterclass in selective memory. Remember, the tutor whispers, "Your great-grandfather was a war hero, not a gambler." The children nod, repeating lines drilled into them since they could talk. The past becomes performance. Memory becomes myth. It's not just words that are rewritten. Images are too. You sneak into the studio of a court artist, where unfinished canvases lean against the wall. He's working on a new portrait of the Dowager Queen, smoothing out her wrinkles and painting over her scowl. You notice an old portrait in the corner, the same queen but heavier, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. The artist shrugs. "For the archive," he says, and turns back to his work. The public gets the fairy tale. The family keeps the truth locked away. Occasionally, the need to rewrite history becomes urgent. You watch a council of ministers debating how to handle a brewing scandal. A bastard child, a dead servant, a missing heir. One suggests bribing the newspapers, another recommends launching a charity ball to distract the public, and a third proposes a full-on festival to celebrate the dynasty's glorious past. Before the week is out, the city is flooded with paintings of past monarchs, commemorative coins, and a new opera praising the family's ancient virtue. It's like watching a magician wave one hand to distract you while the other quietly tucks a secret up his sleeve. Sometimes propaganda is baked into architecture itself. You wander the halls of Windsor or the Escorial, noticing how entire wings are named for victorious battles, even when the real event was more a retreat than a triumph. Statues are erected for kings who died young or accomplished little, their inscriptions full of valor and piety. In one courtyard you see a statue of a prince, known mostly for his gambling debts and spectacular parties, now immortalized as a champion of the poor. The paint is still drying on the plaque. But propaganda has a darker side. The same tools used to celebrate are also used to erase. You watch as historians, under royal orders, destroy letters, burn diaries, and quietly alter baptismal records. In the days before the printing press, a few lost scrolls might have changed the fate of a continent. Now, the battle moves to newspapers and books. Editors paid to kill stories, journalists bribed to write hagiographies, biographers silenced with threats or gifts. The line between history and fiction grows ever thinner. There are even times when rewriting history saves lives. You overhear a whispered conversation between a courtier and a chronicler. A queen's supposed madness is transformed into religious devotion, her years in seclusion recast as a pious retreat. The official records will never say she was locked away after a breakdown. Instead, future generations will pray at her shrine, never suspecting the truth. You notice how these manipulations ripple outwards. Artists are given strict guidelines. No painting the king's clubfoot, no hinting at the princess's limp, no shadow of sadness in the queen's eyes. Writers invent glorious ancestors, embellish minor skirmishes into legendary victories, and quietly tuck away any hints of treason or disgrace. It's a collaborative effort. Everyone is in on the act, from the lowest scribe to the royal family themselves. After all, everyone's future depends on keeping the myth alive. Sometimes, propaganda goes too far and backfires spectacularly. You attend a parade in which the king, famous for his shyness, is hailed as the Lion of the North. The crowd stifles giggles as the poor man barely raises his hand, then flees for his carriage. Behind the scenes, his advisors scramble to spin the story. He was so moved by the people's love, he was overcome with emotion. The newspapers dutifully print the new narrative, and within a week, even the king almost believes it. But the real danger isn't public laughter. It's what happens when the family starts believing their own propaganda. You meet a prince who's been told since birth that his ancestors were saints and warriors. When reality intrudes, a lost war, a broken engagement, a scandal, he is utterly unprepared. Some royal children grow up in a bubble of unreality, shocked and hurt when the world refuses to play along. It's not just history that's warped, it's the very sense of self. Modernity brings new challenges and new tools. You wander through the archives as early photographers arrive, their cameras recording moments with a fidelity that brush and quill cannot match. Suddenly, the family can no longer hide a squint or a frown. Scandals go global, but the old instincts persist. Images are retouched, negatives destroyed, stories embargoed. Even now, A royal Instagram account can show only what the palace wants seen. A bad photo is just one swipe away from oblivion. You realize that propaganda isn't just a tool for royalty. It's part of the glue that holds nations together. Every country needs a founding myth, a story to tell itself about where it came from and why it matters. Monarchies, with their endless supply of drama and symbolism, are perfect for this. But the danger is always the same. The myth becomes a trap, and the truth, inconvenient or not, is lost. Before you leave the archives, you stumble upon a hidden letter, a princess's plea to her brother. Tell them who I was, not just who they wanted me to be. It's a quiet reminder that history is made, not just by the winners, but by those who dare to tell the truth. As you step out into the daylight, you realize that every statue, every painting, every family tree you've ever seen is just one version of the story. The real history is messier, more tragic, more human. The royals may control the official record, but somewhere the truth waits, patient, persistent, and impossible to fully erase. So next time you visit a palace, look twice at those heroic portraits and glowing biographies. You're seeing the greatest illusion ever staged, a centuries-long campaign to convince the world and themselves that royal blood is not just special, but infallible. And if you look carefully enough, you'll catch a glimpse of the secrets that refuse to stay buried.
It's early evening in a palace library that smells of leather, candle wax, and the nervous sweat of 1,000 courtiers who never quite trusted the room's silence. You curl into a battered armchair and crack open the royal correspondence, a stack of letters tied with a gold ribbon and a centuries-old habit of keeping secrets. Tonight, you're sifting through the personal side of royal insanity, not the palace-wide scandals, but the private torments that haunt the bloodlines after dark. Welcome to the realm of royal loneliness, trauma, guilt, and just occasionally, acts of astonishing rebellion. If you think the price of power is just paid in gold, try counting the sleepless nights.
The first letter you read is from a teenage prince, away at a Prussian military academy. He writes to his mother, in scratchy, uncertain script. They call me Little King, and I must never show fear, but sometimes at night I hear the wind and wish I was home. Just your boy again. The page is smudged with something, ink maybe, or tears. In a single paragraph, the bravado slips, and you glimpse the cost of being raised for the throne. Endless performance, constant fear of failure, and not a single soul to trust. Royal childhood is often as lonely as it is luxurious. You're led through the silent nursery, past gold cribs and silver rattles, past paintings of solemn-faced heirs and heiresses, each one more isolated than the last. The nurses and tutors are loyal, yes, but also spies for ambitious mothers and paranoid fathers. Every friend is a rival in disguise, every confidant a possible leak. When a royal child cries, it's rarely for want of toys or treats. More often it's for the freedom to make mistakes without being watched, judged, or immortalized in a family legend. You see this pattern everywhere. The little princess with a stammer, forbidden to speak at meals. The second son, fated never to rule, but forever in his brother's shadow. The clever daughter, desperate to study philosophy, married off to a king she's never met. Some children rebel, hiding in attics, sneaking out to play with commoners, scribbling rude drawings in the margins of their French textbooks. But most learn quickly. Obedience is safer than honesty. A misplaced word at dinner can echo for generations. This loneliness breeds trauma, and the trauma festers into something darker. You leaf through diaries describing panic attacks before public appearances, nightmares of beheading or exile, phobias of crowds and open spaces. In Russia, you read about a Tsarina who develops a crippling fear of windows after witnessing her cousin's assassination. In Spain, a young infanta refuses to eat for weeks after overhearing a servant predict she'll die young, like all the sickly Bourbons. The court physicians call it melancholia. Today, you'd call it anxiety, PTSD, depression. The palaces are full of ghosts, and not just the literal kind. But the greatest spectre is guilt. Royalty, after all, is a birthright denied to almost everyone else. In the rare, unguarded letters between siblings or friends, you catch hints of how heavy that knowledge can be. Why me and not my brother? One queen writes, after her sibling is quietly sent away due to illness. How can I be worthy of this crown, when all I feel is dread, asks a king who will one day abdicate. Is it wrong to wish for a normal life? You suspect many would trade their riches for a quiet cottage and a family that isn't in the history books. Now and then, the loneliness and guilt ignite acts of secret rebellion. These are rarely the grand revolutions you see in the history books. More often, they're small, intensely personal choices. You find a letter from a French dauphin, sneaking coins to a servant girl's family. A German princess pens poetry under a false name, smuggling her words out of the palace in the pockets of a sympathetic footman. An English queen writes anonymous political essays, poking fun at her own court. A Spanish infante, forbidden to travel, learns 4 languages, and keeps up a secret correspondence with radical thinkers across Europe. Sometimes the rebellion is more dramatic. A prince who flees the palace and is found living under an assumed name in Venice, supporting himself by painting. A princess who falls ill for months to avoid an unwanted marriage, only to be discovered healthy and happily tending her rose garden. A future queen who threatens to abdicate unless her family allows her to choose her own husband. An act so radical it nearly sparks a constitutional crisis. These acts don't always end well. The rebellious prince is dragged home in disgrace. The princess is forced into marriage anyway. The queen's essays are discovered and destroyed, her freedom curtailed. But the simple fact of their defiance becomes legend within the family, whispered from nurse to nurse, handed down as a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, not all the insanity is inherited. Yet most royals learn to channel their rebellion into acceptable outlets. You see princes who become great patrons of art, science, or music, safe spaces to express themselves without endangering the dynasty. You watch as princesses found orphanages, champion reforms, or pursue intellectual salons, gathering the brightest minds in Europe under the guise of polite society. Even so, you sense that these achievements are only partial victories. The loneliness remains, tucked away behind polite smiles and public duties. You pause in your reading as the library doors creak open and a dowager duchess enters, her cane tapping softly on the marble. She lowers herself into a chair beside you and regards the pile of letters with a wry smile. Looking for secrets, she whispers. They're everywhere. That's why the walls are so thick. She shares a story of her own, a childhood spent hiding in the library, devouring adventure novels, inventing imaginary friends. It was the only place I was allowed to be nobody for a while. Her eyes mist over, and you realize that for all the grandeur of royalty, the real human cost is measured in moments like these. As the evening deepens, you begin to feel the cumulative weight of centuries. Every letter, every diary, every marginal note in a schoolbook is a plea for connection, for honesty, for escape. Yet, for all the walls, all the rituals, all the self-inflicted loneliness, you sense an undeniable resilience. Most royals survive, not just in body, but in spirit. They become masters of adaptation, of reinvention, of finding joy in stolen moments and private jokes. You find an unsigned note tucked in the back of a book, written in a spidery hand. I am not the crown, nor the cloak, nor the name. I am the beating heart behind them. It's a small act of courage, and perhaps the most honest thing you've read all night. As you leave the library, the corridors outside are full of laughter and music, the echo of 1,000 stories left untold. For every royal who breaks under the pressure, there's another who quietly, stubbornly, makes a life in the spaces between expectation and reality. Maybe that's the true inheritance of Europe's royal bloodlines. Not just power, not just madness, but the endless, restless search for a moment of ordinary humanity. So next time you see a prince waving from a balcony, or a queen staring stoically from a portrait, remember what you've read tonight: the loneliness, the letters, the rebellion, the private world behind the public mask, waiting just like you for someone to understand. You're up before dawn, slipping through palace corridors, still echoing with last night's laughter and yesterday's secrets. The air is heavy with the lingering scent of perfume, wine and candle smoke, ghosts of banquets past. But today, you're not a guest at the table. You're here to witness the normal day-to-day grind of royalty, where every waking hour is a tug-of-war between public spectacle and private exhaustion. This is the royal routine, that relentless clockwork designed to keep up appearances while quietly driving generations just a little bit mad. Forget any dreams of sleeping in. The day starts early, and it starts on someone else's terms. You hear the first stirrings long before the sun rises. Servants padding through halls, kitchen boys stoking fires, the faint clatter of breakfast trays being assembled by candlelight. For the monarch, the first event is the rising, an audience, not a moment of solitude. Even in bed, there's a schedule. You watch as the king is woken by a flock of attendants, each with a specific duty. One brings water, another selects the undergarments, another opens the heavy curtains to reveal a world that is already watching. There's no privacy, and barely any silence. The queen, too, is greeted not by peace, but by a carefully choreographed parade of maids, dressers, hairdressers, ladies-in-waiting, and at least one over-enthusiastic dog. Everyone's in a rush, but nobody is allowed to show it. The whole realm feels like a living museum exhibit, with the royals as its main attractions. If you so much as sneeze, someone will hand you a handkerchief and 3 different herbal remedies before you can even sniff. Breakfast is a performance, never just a meal. In France's Versailles, the petit déjeuner is a parade, with courtiers pressing close to watch the king nibble on a croissant or sip his chocolate. Every bite is symbolic. Every glance from the monarch is loaded with political meaning. The right guest seated next to you can mean an alliance, a promotion, or the start of a 10-year feud over who gets the juiciest peach. Even the servants are playing a game, swapping gossip as they refill plates and pass silent messages along the line. Then comes the real work. Audiences, councils, state documents, and endless paperwork. You sit in on a morning audience with a foreign ambassador. The king's smile is stiff, his eyes darting to the clock, and you can almost see the script running through his mind. Be gracious, don't promise too much. Compliment the mustache. Behind every polite exchange is a minefield of diplomatic risk. If you're a royal, a careless word can spark a war, a pause too long can topple a treaty, and forgetting a birthday, especially your wife's, can haunt you for decades. Court life is exhausting theatre. By noon, the palace is buzzing with activity. Petitions from nobles, presentations from inventors, petitions from peasants, and yet more ceremonies. You pass through a throne room so full of officials that the air smells of ink and sweat. The business of the state is never really finished, because every day brings more problems than solutions. Royal secretaries mutter under their breath, tripping over their own feet to keep up with a monarch who's expected to solve everything and offend no one. The younger royals have their own routines, lessons in languages, music, politics, and if you're lucky, a bit of fencing or riding. You peek into a classroom where a bored teenage princess recites Latin verbs to a tutor who's more interested in his own reflection. In another room, a future king is drilled on the art of smiling diplomatically, his face frozen in a polite mask that barely cracks, even when he's caught daydreaming about running away to join a circus or at least a regular family. Lunch is another public ritual, carefully balanced between indulgence and restraint. You watch as courtiers compete for the best seats, while the royals navigate a minefield of etiquette. Which fork to use, which topic is safe, which guest might be a spy. The food is exquisite, but the appetite is often missing. Anxiety and politics are rarely a good seasoning. The afternoon brings walks in the gardens never unobserved, the occasional hunt for show, not survival, and more audiences with ministers, generals, and petitioners. You're there as a nervous inventor presents a new machine to the king, an elaborate device for roasting meat while also playing music. The king nods politely, the court applauds, and everyone prays that no one remembers last year's disaster with the exploding soup tureen. For the women of the court, afternoons mean an endless cycle of dress changes, salon visits, and for the queen, managing a court that's half finishing school and half battleground. You watch as a duchess accidentally spills wine on a rival's new gown, as alliances are sealed or shattered over a game of cards, and as whispers turn into rumors that can wreck reputations before dinner. For a princess, every gesture, how you curtsy, whom you dance with, how you fold your fan, is scrutinized for hidden meaning. By evening, the palace transforms yet again. Dinner is the main event, a theatrical spectacle of silver, candlelight, and courses that seem to multiply just to keep the kitchen staff from ever sleeping. You sit at the edge of a banquet table, where the conversation is as sharp as the knives, and every toast is an opportunity for flattery or sabotage. If you're lucky, the evening ends with a concert, a masked ball, or a fireworks display over the gardens. If you're unlucky, you find yourself trapped between two warring relatives debating the finer points of protocol while the dessert melts unnoticed. And after the guests leave, you might imagine that's the end of the day, but for royalty, there's still the private routine. The monarch is put to bed by an audience of attendants, every step recorded, every cough noted. The Queen writes letters, carefully guarded words to distant relatives, coded hints to political allies, private laments to her mother. The palace never truly sleeps. There are always night watchmen, always a chamberlain or lady-in-waiting who keeps an ear out for the next crisis. What you don't see, unless you know where to look, are the little escapes. A stolen book under the covers, a prince sneaking out to the stables, a princess feeding stray cats in the moonlit garden. These moments of peace are rare and fiercely protected in a life ruled by schedule and spectacle. Even the smallest act of autonomy feels like a revolution. But the cost of this routine is enormous. Behind the glitter and ceremony, exhaustion gnaws at every royal. The pressure to be flawless never lets up. The fear of scandal never sleeps. Children grow up anxious, adults turn brittle, and even the most charming king or queen is haunted by the knowledge that one wrong move could unravel the entire facade. You overhear a duke joke that the only time he truly relaxes is when pretending to be asleep. You notice that everyone, from the monarch down to the youngest page, has developed a talent for compartmentalizing, wearing masks within masks, switching from public to private to secret self in a heartbeat. If you wonder why so many royals are remembered as eccentric or difficult, remember this endless performance. It leaves its mark. Still, not every day is a disaster. There are moments of genuine joy, a child's laugh in a forgotten hallway, an impromptu game in the snow, a burst of music that makes even the grimmest statesman smile. You watch a queen sneak an extra pastry to a homesick page. You see a king pause in the middle of a ceremony to comfort a frightened dog. For all the madness, some humanity survives. As the palace finally quiets, you take one last walk through its echoing halls. The gilded clocks tick on, measuring out a life that looks effortless only from the outside. For the people inside, every day is a lesson in endurance, adaptability, and the bittersweet art of surviving one's own legend. So the next time you envy the pomp and splendor of a royal life, remember what the routine really costs. Privacy, spontaneity, and the freedom to be imperfect. For Europe's royal bloodlines, the greatest insanity might just be the relentless need to pretend they are, in fact, something more than human. You awaken in a palace that's neither day nor night, a place caught in the hush before a storm or the sigh after a thunderclap. The great halls are silent, velvet curtains hang heavy, muffling both sound and memory, and outside the windows the world stirs, oblivious to the insomnia of its kings and queens. Tonight, you'll wander through the final rooms of royal madness, the twilight of the bloodlines, where the burdens of centuries settle into bittersweet endings, sometimes redemptive, sometimes tragic, but always finally, unmistakably human. Here, the heirs of Europe's royal houses drift through their palaces like the last players on a fading stage. The endless rituals and expectations remain, but they echo hollowly, like applause after the show is over. Some of the heirs are stoic, content to pose for photographs and cut ribbons, performing the soft power of modern monarchy. Others are restless, dreaming of escape. Some just seem bewildered, survivors of a family story they never wrote, and can't quite escape. You start your night with a glimpse of an aging king, his hair silvered, his medals heavy on a chest grown weary from decades of standing straight. He wakes early from habit, shuffling through sunbeams in a silk dressing gown, reading letters from ministers who treat him like an icon more than a man. His breakfasts are silent affairs, shared with courtiers who speak in riddles, always wary of saying too much. The king's gaze lingers on an old portrait of his grandfather, the last to actually wield power. He wonders if his own grandchildren will remember him as anything more than a signature on Christmas cards and a half-remembered anecdote about etiquette. Elsewhere, you watch as a young prince, third in line and painfully aware of it, sneaks through a service door to smoke a forbidden cigarette on a windswept balcony. He stares out at the city lights, headphones jammed over his ears, quietly longing for the kind of obscurity he'll never have. Down the corridor, his sister scrolls through social media, wincing at every headline about her family. Scandals half true, half invented, all out of her control. She texts a friend in another monarchy. Do you ever wish you were just nobody? The old guards are retiring, the new ones fumbling their lines. The court calendar is a patchwork of tradition and PR, with ancient rituals watered down for television. The state opening of Parliament still glitters with diamonds and gold. But now the faces in the crowd are more likely to be YouTubers than dukes. Paparazzi cluster at the gates, hoping for a glimpse of a wardrobe malfunction or a rare unscripted smile. The divinity is gone. The anxiety, though, has only evolved. In private, the family rituals remain. You find the Queen quietly writing thank you notes in a drawing room no tourist ever sees. A dowager duchess tends her roses at dawn, humming old lullabies to herself. In the children's wing, little princes and princesses play tag among priceless antiques, watched over by nannies with degrees in child psychology instead of court etiquette. The language of power has changed. Service, duty, modernization. Yet beneath it, the old strains persist. What if they fail? What if the world stops caring? There are late-night arguments too when the wine has flowed a little too freely, and the walls seem less judgmental. Old wounds are reopened, unmarried cousins, distant relatives, exiled for embarrassing indiscretions. The cousin with the illness, nobody mentions at official dinners. Everyone tries to be kinder than their ancestors, but centuries of habit die hard. Sometimes, all you can manage is a tired laugh and a toast to survival. You sense the peculiar weight of the end of the line. For some houses, the heir is a middle-aged bachelor with no children. For others, the title passes to a distant relative who grew up in an apartment and never expected to inherit anything more prestigious than a soccer trophy. The royal apartments echo with questions no one dares to ask aloud. Is this how it ends? Are we just a story now, something for the tourists and the history books? You flip through a scrapbook made by a retired housekeeper, its pages stuffed with yellowed news clippings and candid snapshots. You see children riding bicycles down palace halls, queens caught laughing, kings dancing badly at family weddings. These are the moments no chronicler records, but they're as real as the coronations and scandals. They're the antidote to the official story, the quiet proof that, behind all the ceremony and insanity, these families are still made of people. The most human moments come late at night. You hear the shuffle of slippers in the hallway as the oldest family members meet for cocoa in a small sitting room. Someone brings out a battered chess set. Another reads aloud from a battered novel. There are jokes about ancient ancestors, gentle teasing over childhood escapades, and the kind of easy affection that never makes it into royal biographies. If you listen closely, you'll hear not the whispers of power, but of love and endurance. Of course, there are still flashes of madness, fights over inheritance, old jealousies, the return of a black sheep relative after decades abroad. You witness a shouting match over a long-lost tiara, followed by sheepish apologies and a group photo for the family WhatsApp. Nobody is perfect, and the old pressures linger, but the world has changed. No one loses their head figuratively, or literally, over a family squabble anymore. In the end, what remains? The palaces will survive as museums, the jewels locked in glass cases, the scandals reduced to juicy anecdotes for late-night television. The divine right has faded into nostalgia, a story told for the benefit of tourists and little children, but the legacies of anxiety, perfectionism, and self-doubt linger in the bloodlines, alongside flashes of resilience, humor, and the stubborn desire to make meaning out of chaos. You walk through one last gallery, sunlight slanting across the marble floor. The portraits seem less intimidating now, their painted eyes a little kinder, their famous features a bit less remote.